Hey guys, picture this. Towering stone walls, knights in shining armor, and fair maidens. But wait, what if I told you the real action in medieval castles happened in the shadows, where desperate women traded their bodies for scraps of survival in a world of filth, disease, and royal hypocrisy? Buckle up, because we're peeling back the glamorous myth to reveal the gritty, ironic nightmare of prostitutes in those so-called fairy tale fortresses. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The Middle Ages. That golden era of chivalry, where men jousted for honor and ladies swooned over troubadours singing of courtly love. But let's be real, folks. Behind those tapestries and turrets, life was a stinking cesspit of absurdity and suffering, and nowhere was that more evident than in the hidden corners where prostitutes eked out an existence. We're talking about women, often poor, widowed, or just plain unlucky, who found themselves in the orbit of medieval castles, those massive symbols of power that doubled as playgrounds for the elite and battlegrounds for the desperate. Oh, the irony, castles built to protect virtue, yet teeming with vice. If you think modern life is tough, imagine surviving as a sex worker in a time when bathing was optional, medicine was a prayer away from witchcraft, and your clients could be anyone from a drunken guard to a lecherous lord. What a dream, right? Drop a comment if you've ever romanticized the Middle Ages. I'll wait while you rethink that Renaissance fair outfit. Let's start by setting the scene properly, because context is everything in this twisted tale. The medieval period, roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, wasn't some uniform fairy tale across Europe. It varied from the muddy villages of England to the sun-baked fortresses of Spain, but one thing was constant: sex sold, and society pretended to hate it while secretly relying on it. Prostitution wasn't just tolerated. In many places, it was regulated like a municipal utility. Cities like London, Paris, and Florence had official brothels. Stews, they called them in England, because nothing says romance like comparing your workplace to a hot bathhouse full of questionable steam. But castles, that's where things get deliciously absurd. These weren't your average urban dens. They were isolated strongholds, often perched on hills or surrounded by moats, housing nobles, knights, soldiers, and a ragtag army of servants. And where there were men with power and boredom, there were women filling the gaps, literally and figuratively. Picture a typical medieval castle, cold stone walls echoing with the clank of armor, drafty halls where the wind howled like a banshee, and chambers lit by flickering torches that cast shadows longer than a king's ego. The lord and lady might occupy the solar, a fancy room for private affairs, but down in the bowels, the kitchens, stables, and guard rooms, that's where the real underbelly throbbed. Prostitutes didn't always live inside the castle proper. That would be too scandalous for the pious facade. Instead, they often hovered on the fringes, in the castle town or bailey, the outer courtyard where merchants, blacksmiths, and yes, women of ill repute set up shop. During peacetime, a castle was like a self-contained village, buzzing with activity. Knights trained, feasts were held, and travelers passed through, all potential customers for a quick transaction in a hayloft or behind a tapestry. But oh, the pain of it. These women weren't choosing this life out of empowerment. They were thrust into it by poverty, war, or abandonment. Widows left penniless after their husbands died in some pointless crusade, orphans with no skills but survival, or even former servants ruined by their masters' wandering hands. Survival in the past. It was a brutal joke, where one bad harvest could turn a respectable girl into a harlot overnight. And let's not sugarcoat the absurdity. The church, that great moral arbiter, had a love-hate relationship with prostitution that would make modern politicians blush. St. Augustine himself, the big-shot theologian, argued that prostitutes were necessary to prevent worse sins, like adultery or sodomy. Remove prostitutes from society, he quipped, and you will unsettle everything on account of lusts. How convenient. So, while priests thundered from pulpits about eternal damnation, bishops in places like Winchester actually owned and licensed brothels, raking in profits from the Winchester geese, as the prostitutes were mockingly called. Geese, get it? Because they were plucked clean by their handlers. In castles under ecclesiastical control, and many were, since bishops often doubled as lords. This hypocrisy reached peak levels. Imagine confessing your sins to a priest whose boss is profiting from the very act you're repenting. Drop a comment below. Would you confess to that priest, or just laugh at the irony? But back to the castles themselves. Not all were grand like Windsor or the Tower of London. Many were grim, fortified piles of rock in remote areas, garrisoned by bored soldiers waiting for the next invasion. And soldiers, as history repeatedly shows, are not known for their celibacy. During sieges, when a castle was under attack, the population swelled with refugees, mercenaries, and camp followers, a euphemism for prostitutes who trailed armies like shadows. These women pitched tents outside the walls, offering comfort to the besiegers, or, if sneaky enough, slipping inside to service the defenders. The absurdity? In a time of arrows flying and boiling oil pouring from battlements, sex was still a commodity. One historical account from the 100 Years' War describes French prostitutes mingling with English troops around besieged castles, turning the no man's land into a bizarre marketplace of flesh. But the pain, these women faced rape, disease, and starvation if the siege dragged on. Syphilis hadn't hit Europe yet. That was a post-Columbus gift. But gonorrhea, chlamydia, and a host of other infections ran rampant, treated with mercury or herbal poultices that burned more than they healed. Survival meant dodging the pox while pleasing men who saw you as disposable. Let's zoom in on a fictional yet all too real scenario to make this immersive. Because history isn't just facts, it's the nightmare lives people endured. Meet Ilara, a composite of countless women from the records. She's 22, from a peasant family in the 13th century England. Her village razed during one of King John's endless squabbles. With no options, she drifts to the shadow of a looming castle. Let's say Dover, perched on its cliffs like a grumpy giant. The Castellan, the guy in charge, turns a blind eye as long as she doesn't cause trouble. Ilara sets up in the bailey, sharing a cramped hut with other women, their business conducted in alcoves or under the stars. Her clients? Guards off duty, itching for relief after hours of standing watch and chainmail that chafed like hell. Knights too, fresh from tournaments, their courtly love poems forgotten in the heat of the moment. Even the Lord might summon her discreetly, through a servant, for a rendezvous in a tower room, all while his wife prays in the chapel downstairs. The irony drips like castle damp. Chivalry dictated protecting women, yet these protectors were the biggest exploiters. Daily life for Ilara? A farce of endurance. Wake at dawn to the clang of the blacksmith, scrounge for bread and ale, the staple diet, watery and sour. Then the regulations kick in, because medieval society loved its rules. In many places, prostitutes had to wear distinctive clothing, a yellow hood in Italy, striped dresses in France, or bells on their shoes in England to announce their shame. Jingle jangle, here comes the sin. Absurd, right? It was meant to warn decent folk, but really, it just advertised services. Ilara might pay a fee to the castle bailiff for protection, a cut of her earnings vanishing into the Lord's coffers. And violence? Constant. Drunken clients who didn't pay, rival women fighting over turf, or moral crusaders, like those periodic church crackdowns where prostitutes were paraded through town, whipped, or branded. One wrong move, and you're out in the cold, literally, begging for scraps while wolves howled in the woods. But oh, the social dynamics inside the castle walls added layers of sarcasm-worthy absurdity. Noble women, cloaked in virtue, knew damn well what went on. Some even turned a blind eye to their husbands' dalliances, as long as it stayed discreet. Better a prostitute than a mistress who might claim inheritance. Servants whispered gossip. Did you hear about Sir Geoffrey and that girl from the stables? The stables, by the way, were prime spots for quick encounters amid the hay and horse manure. Romantic, huh? And during feasts, when the great hall overflowed with roasted meats, minstrels, and mead, prostitutes might mingle as entertainers, dancing or singing before slipping away with a guest. The pain beneath? Malnutrition, as these women rarely got the feast scraps, unwanted pregnancies, handled with dangerous herbs or abandonment, and the ever-present specter of death from childbirth or infection. Drop a comment. If you were Ilara, what survival hack would you try in that mess? Now let's delve deeper into how castles amplified this nightmare. Unlike city brothels, which were often municipal enterprises, think Southwark in London, where the Bishop of Winchester licensed stews and profited handsomely. Castle prostitution was more ad hoc, tied to the whims of the Lord. In wartime, it exploded. Take the Crusades, knights marching off to reclaim the Holy Land. their baggage trains swollen with prostitutes who serviced the troops en route and during sieges of eastern castles. Richard the Lionheart himself reportedly lamented the whores distracting his army, yet did little to stop it. Absurdity alert: holy warriors sworn to purity, funding their campaigns partly through vice taxes. Back home, English castles like those along the Welsh marches became hubs for border skirmishes, attracting mercenaries and their followers. These women trudged miles, carrying pots and bedding, only to face the horrors of camp life: dysentery from bad water, assaults from enemies, and betrayal by their own protectors. And the children? Oh, the heartbreaking irony. Many prostitutes bore kids in these environments, brothel babies raised amid the chaos. Historical digs in places like medieval Nördlingen reveal infant burials near brothels, silent testaments to high mortality. But some survived, apprenticed or absorbed into castle service. A cycle of poverty spinning on. Ilara might cradle a babe while negotiating her next client, whispering lullabies over the din of armor. Survival's cruel joke: bring life into a world that chews you up. As we peel back more layers, consider the economic angle, because nothing says dark truth like capitalism in chainmail. Castles weren't just military, they were economic centers, controlling lands and trade. Prostitutes contributed, indirectly taxing the lust of visitors. In France, under kings like Louis IX, who ironically tried to ban prostitution while on crusade, castle towns still harbored bawdy houses. The king sainted for piety, yet his realm riddled with vice. Sarcasm overload, holiness on the throne, hell in the hay. But wait, there's more absurdity in the regulations. In some German castles, prostitutes were part of the Frauenhaus system, official brothels where women were inspected for disease. A medieval STD check involving poking and prodding that was anything but gentle. Clean bill, back to work. Infected, cast out to beg. The pain, no pensions, no rights, just endless exploitation. And fashion, forced to avoid ladylike attire lest they tempt too much. No veils or silks for you, dear. Stick to the stripes that scream, available. Shifting gears, let's explore the role during tournaments. Those flashy displays of knightly prowess held in castle fields. Crowds flocked, and so did prostitutes, setting up booths like a sordid fairground. Jousts by day, jousts of another kind by night. One chronicle from 14th century Touraine describes women plying their trade amid the tents, while heralds announced victories. Ironic, isn't it? Honor on the field, dishonor off it. And the violence. Can't skip that nightmare. Prostitutes faced beatings from clients, pimps, often the brothel keepers, or authorities. In one case from medieval Dijon, a woman was fined for insulting a customer who shortchanged her. Justice? Ha! Survival meant swallowing pride with the ale. As part 1 wraps. But hold on, we're just scratching the surface. In the next installment, we'll dive into specific scandals, like royal mistresses blurring lines with prostitutes and the sieges where sex became a weapon. What do you think was the worst part so far? Comment below and stay tuned for part 2's deeper horrors. Hey guys, ready to plunge deeper into the medieval muck? Last time, we cracked open the grim reality of prostitutes in castles, those stone behemoths of chivalry that hid a festering underbelly of vice and desperation. If you thought part 1 was a wild ride, brace yourselves, because now we're diving into the juicy scandals, the absurdities of royal lust, and the brutal survival games where sex was both currency and weapon. What's the most shocking thing you've heard about medieval life so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep this journey rolling. Picture this. It's the 13th century, and the castle's great hall is alive with a feast. Tables groan under roast boar, minstrels strum lutes, and lords laugh over goblets of wine. But outside, in the flickering torchlight of the bailey, women like our fictional Ilara are working the shadows, their lives a grotesque parody of the grandeur within. The irony is thicker than the castle walls. While knights pledge their honor to distant ladies, they're slipping coins to women who can't afford to say no. And oh, the scandals. Because nothing spices up history like a nobleman caught with his breeches down. Let's peel back more layers of this hypocritical, pain-soaked world where survival meant navigating a maze of lust, power, and betrayal. First, let's talk about the royal connection, because kings and their kin weren't above dipping into the castle's illicit offerings. Medieval monarchs were supposed to be God's anointed, pillars of virtue, yet their courts were often brothels in all but name. Take King John of England. Yeah, the one from the Robin Hood tales, already infamous for taxing his barons into rebellion. Chroniclers like Matthew Paris whispered that John had a particular fondness for lewd women, a polite way of saying he prowled for prostitutes and mistresses alike. In castles like Dover or Winchester, where he held court, the line between mistress and prostitute blurred like ale in a muddy puddle. Mistresses were high class, sure, kept in fine gowns and maybe a manor. But prostitutes? They were the low-rent version, servicing the king's entourage in the stables or back rooms. The absurdity? John's wife, Queen Isabella, was barely out of her teens, yet he was off chasing women who sold their bodies to survive his war's fallout. Imagine Alara dodging the king's roving eye while fending off his knights. One wrong move, and she's either elevated to mistress status or discarded like yesterday's bread. Survival tip: smile at the king, but don't expect loyalty. Got a favorite scandalous king? Comment below. I'm curious who tops your list. Now let's zoom into the sieges, where the nightmare of castle life turned apocalyptic. When a castle was under attack, say during the 100 Years' War between England and France, it became a pressure cooker of fear, hunger, and desperation. Prostitutes, often among the camp followers' trailing armies, played a bizarre role. Outside the walls, besieging forces set up sprawling camps, complete with makeshift markets, blacksmiths, and yes, bawdy tents. These women serviced soldiers waiting to storm the castle, their presence so routine that chroniclers barely blinked. Inside, defenders, knights, archers, and even the lord's retinue were cooped up for months, nerves frayed, bellies empty. Enter the castle's resident prostitutes, like Alara, who might sneak into guardrooms or turrets for a quick transaction. Why? Because even in war, men crave distraction, and coins still changed hands. The dark irony: sex was a weapon, keeping morale up or sowing chaos. One French chronicle from 1346 during the Siege of Calais notes prostitutes slipping messages between sides. Spies in petticoats, trading secrets for safety. But the pain? These women faced starvation alongside everyone else, their bodies bartered for moldy bread as supplies dwindled. And if the castle fell, rape, slaughter, or enslavement awaited. Survival was a cruel gamble. Please the right soldier, and maybe you'd eat tomorrow. Let's pause for a grim reality check. Disease. Medieval castles were petri dishes of pestilence. No plumbing, chamber pots dumped into moats, and rats scurrying through the straw. Prostitutes, working in close quarters, were especially vulnerable. Gonorrhea, known as the burning sickness, was a common curse, treated with agonizing mercury salves that rotted teeth and poisoned slowly. Leprosy, too, loomed. A single sore could brand you an outcast, banished to a colony outside the castle's protection. Alara might check her skin daily, praying her latest client didn't leave her with a death sentence. The absurdity? Castle physicians, if they existed, were more likely to bleed you with leeches than cure you. And the church, ever present, blamed prostitutes for spreading moral decay while ignoring the lords who funded it. Drop a comment. Would you trust a medieval doctor, or just pray and hope for the best? Now let's talk about the women themselves, because their stories are the heartbeat of this nightmare. Not all prostitutes were like Alara, scraping by in the Bailey. Some climbed the ranks, becoming what we'd call courtesans in later centuries, women who leveraged their charm into influence. In castles like those of the French Valois kings, certain women hovered on the edges of court. Not quite prostitutes, but not quite mistresses either. Take Alice Perez, a real figure from the 14th century England, who started as a lady-in-waiting, but was rumored to have traded favors with King Edward III. Chroniclers sneered at her as a shameless hussy, but Alice played the game, amassing wealth and land. The irony? She was vilified while the king's indiscretions were shrugged off. For every Alice, though, there were dozens of Alaras, invisible in the records, their lives a cycle of exploitation. Widows, orphans, or runaway serfs. Many were driven to prostitution by feudal laws that tied peasants to the land, leaving no escape from poverty. A bad harvest, a dead husband, or a lord's whim could push a woman into the trade. And once in, good luck getting out. Society branded you, literally or figuratively, with no path back to respectability. The castle's social hierarchy added another layer of absurdity. At the top, the lord and lady presided, their marriage a political contract, their fidelity optional. Below them, knights and squires chased glory but weren't above chasing skirts. Servants, cooks, maids, stable boys were the backbone, but even they looked down on prostitutes, despite sharing the same squalor. The pain. These women were the castle's lowest rung, yet essential to its ecosystem. Without them, the men's sins might spill into worse chaos. Affairs with noblewomen, for instance, could spark feuds or wars. So the castle tolerated its necessary evil, all while preaching purity. Hypocrisy much? Imagine Ilara overhearing a sermon in the castle chapel, the priest railing against fornication, while her last client, a deacon, winks from the pews. Comment below. What's the most hypocritical thing you've come across in history? Let's shift to the economics, because nothing screams medieval absurdity like profiting off misery. Castles were economic hubs, controlling trade, taxes, and labor. Prostitution was no exception. It was a business, taxed and regulated like blacksmithing or brewing. In some castles, the lord's bailiff collected a cut from every transaction, a sort of sin tax that lined noble pockets. In German castle towns, Frauenhauses, official brothels, were overseen by municipal officials who ensured quality control, read disease checks, and took their share. The pain, prostitutes like Ilara were squeezed from all sides, clients who might not pay, pimps who demanded protection money, and authorities who fined you for existing. One English record from 1301 shows a woman named Marjorie fined for keeping a disorderly house in a castle bailey. Disorderly because she dared argue with a client who beat her. Justice? Only if you had the coin to buy it. And then there were the tournaments, those medieval Super Bowls where knights showed off and crowds bet on blood. Held in castle fields, these events drew merchants, minstrels, and, you guessed it, prostitutes. Tents sprouted like mushrooms, offering everything from ale to company. A 14th century Italian chronicle describes women of loose morals, dancing for knights before leading them to private corners. The absurdity, while troubadours sang of unattainable ladies, real women were selling themselves for a crust of bread. The pain, tournaments often ended in riots or brawls, and prostitutes caught in the chaos risked injury or worse. Ilara might weave through the crowd, dodging drunken squires, her bells jingling like a grim soundtrack. Survival meant reading the room, or the tent, and knowing when to run. Now let's touch on the children again, because their fate is a gut punch. Many prostitutes bore children in these harsh conditions, often fathered by clients who vanished. These brothel babies faced a bleak future, death in infancy from disease or neglect, or survival as castle drudges, stable hands, scullery maids, or, tragically, the next generation of prostitutes. Archaeological finds like those in medieval York show infant graves near known brothel sites, a silent tally of loss. Ilara might rock her child to sleep, knowing the castle offered no mercy for either of them. The irony. The same lords who condemned bastards relied on their mothers to keep the castle's darker appetites fed. As we round out Part 2, consider the broader absurdity. Castles, built to defend against enemies, were battlegrounds of a different kind for these women. They fought not with swords, but with wits, enduring a world that revered chastity while thriving on vice. Next time, we'll explore the religious crusades, both the holy wars and the moral ones, and how they shaped this grim trade. What's the most surprising thing you've learned so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's meet back for Part 3's Unholy Revelations. Hey guys, ready to wade back into the medieval cesspool? We've already peeled back the curtain on the grim lives of prostitutes in castles, those towering fortresses where chivalry was a shiny lie and survival was a brutal hustle. Part 1 gave you the gritty basics, Part 2 dove into royal scandals and siege-time chaos. Now, we're plunging into the unholy mess of religious crusades, both the sword-swinging kind and the moral crusades that tried to cleanse society while conveniently ignoring the Lord's dirty hands. Buckle up for more irony, pain, and absurdity. What's the wildest thing you've learned about medieval hypocrisy so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's dive into Part 3's dark truths, the Crusades. Oh, what a spectacle. Picture thousands of knights, pilgrims, and hangers-on marching off to liberate Jerusalem or some other holy site, waving crosses and shouting about salvation. From the 11th to the 13th centuries, these holy wars were the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster franchise, except with more dysentery and fewer happy endings. Castles, both in Europe and the Holy Land, were key staging grounds, mustering points for armies, strongholds for Crusader knights, and hubs for the chaos that followed. And where there was chaos, there were prostitutes, trailing the armies like vultures circling a battlefield. The irony? These women were condemned as sinners by the same church that blessed the Crusaders' swords, yet their presence was as essential as the baggage trains hauling grain. Armies needed food, weapons, and, apparently, sex to keep morale from crumbling. Our friend Alara, if she'd hitched her fate to a crusading army, might have found herself outside a castle like Acre or Antioch, peddling her wares in a dusty camp where faith and filth shared a bedroll. Survival meant dodging arrows, disease, and the occasional zealot who thought burning a harlot would earn him a fast pass to heaven. Drop a comment. Would you rather face a crusader's sword or their sermons? Let's set the scene in a crusader castle, say Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, one of those massive fortresses that screamed invincible but hid a sordid underbelly. These castles weren't just military bases, they were microcosms of medieval life, packed with knights, squires, servants, and a motley crew of camp followers. Prostitutes set up shop in tents or nearby villages, their services as much a part of the war effort as blacksmiths forging swords. Chroniclers like William of Tyre, writing about the Crusades, barely mention these women, but when they do, it's with a sneer, calling them daughters of Babylon, or worse. Yet, the Crusader lords, from Richard the Lionheart to lesser knights, turned a blind eye. Why? Because keeping an army of testosterone-fueled men in check required distractions. The absurdity: knights vowed to purity before God, yet their camps buzzed with vice. One account from the Third Crusade describes prostitutes operating openly in the shadow of Acre's walls, their tents marked with red cloth to signal availability. Medieval marketing at its finest. The pain? These women faced the same horrors as soldiers: starvation, disease, and the constant threat of violence from both enemies and their own clients. If the castle fell, they were often the first to suffer, either killed in the sack or enslaved by the victors. Alara, trudging through the desert with a crusader army, might have prayed for a quick death over capture by Saracen forces, who saw no distinction between her and the baggage. Back in Europe, the Church's moral crusades added another layer of cruel irony. While knights were off crusading, bishops and preachers launched campaigns to purify society, targeting prostitutes as the root of all sin. In the 13th century, figures like Saint Louis IX of France, yes, the same guy who led 2 crusades, tried to stamp out prostitution back home. He passed laws banishing common women from cities and castles, threatening fines, imprisonment, or exile. Sounds noble, right? Except his own castles, like those in Paris or Normandy, still teemed with prostitutes servicing his court. The hypocrisy was glaring. Louis wanted to be a saint, but his kingdom's economy leaned on the very vice he condemned. In England, similar crackdowns happened, like the 1290 ordinance in London that forced prostitutes to wear flat caps to mark their shame, yet castle bailiffs kept collecting their cut from the trade. Alara, caught in one of these purges, might have been dragged through the streets, her striped dress a target for jeering crowds, only to return to work the next night because the castle's knights didn't stop knocking. The pain, no matter how loud the church preached, society needed its scapegoats to function. Comment below, what's more absurd, holy wars or holy hypocrisy? Now, let's zoom in on the religious orders running some castles, because nothing screams irony like warrior monks with a side hustle in vice. The Knights Templar and Hospitallers, those poster boys of crusading piety, controlled massive castles in Europe and the Levant. Their vows included chastity, yet their strongholds, like Chateau Pellerin in the Holy Land, were surrounded by the usual camp followers. Templar records are cagey, but rumors swirled of knights consorting with local women, prostitutes included. The absurdity? These guys were supposed to be God's elite, yet their castles operated like any other, with sex as a quiet currency. The pain for women like Alara? No protection, no rights. If a Templar took a fancy, you complied or faced accusations of corrupting a holy knight. Good luck winning that argument. One story from the 13th century France claims a prostitute was whipped for tempting a hospitaller, while he walked away with a slapped wrist. Justice was a myth, and survival meant playing a rigged game. Let's talk about the moral crusade's impact on castle life. When reformers got zealous, prostitutes faced public punishments designed to humiliate. In some French castles, women were paraded in carts, their heads shaved, while crowds pelted them with mud. In Germany, the Frauenhaus system, regulated brothels, came under scrutiny, with moralists demanding closure. Yet, the brothels stayed open, because lords and bishops profited. A 14th century record from Augsburg shows a Frauenhaus near a castle paying taxes directly to the bishop's coffers. Talk about divine revenue. Alara might have faced a morality inspection, where officials poked her for signs of disease, or witchcraft. because sure, that was the real problem. The pain. These inspections were invasive, humiliating, and often a pretext to extort more money. Survival meant enduring the church's wrath while serving its flock. Shifting gears, let's explore the role of prostitutes in castle espionage, because yes, it happened. Women like Alara, moving between soldiers, knights, and even lords, were perfectly placed to overhear secrets. During sieges, they might pass messages to the enemy for a bribe or warn defenders of an attack for a favor. A chronicle from the Albigensian Crusade in southern France mentions women of ill repute, smuggling letters through castle lines, their low status making them invisible to guards. The irony, condemned as worthless, they could sway battles. The pain, betrayal was a death sentence, caught spying, and you'd face torture or execution. Alara, slipping a note to a besieger, would have known one slip meant a noose. Now let's touch on the children again, because their fate keeps haunting this story. Prostitutes' kids born in castle shadows were often abandoned or raised in squalor. Some were taken in by convents, ironic given the church's stance, but only if they were young enough to save. Others grew up in the castle's margins, fetching water or cleaning stables, their mother's stigma clinging like damp rot. A 13th century English court record mentions a boy, son of a harlot, apprenticed to a castle blacksmith. Lucky, compared to most. The pain. These kids had no future, their lives shaped by a world that despised their existence. Alara, cradling her child, might have dreamed of escape, but feudal ties and poverty chained her to the castle's orbit. Economically, castles kept profiting off this misery. Prostitution taxes were a steady trickle into the lord's purse, whether through direct fines or rent for bailey huts. In Italian castles, like those of the Visconti in Milan, prostitutes were sometimes gifted to visiting dignitaries as a diplomatic perk. Hospitality with a side of sin. The absurdity, a system that preached morality while commodifying women. The pain, no retirement plan, no sick leave, just endless work until disease or violence claimed you. As we wrap part 3, the castle's dark heart beats stronger. These women, vilified yet vital, navigated a world where faith fueled war and vice fueled profit. Next time, we'll close with the twilight of medieval prostitution, how the Black Death and changing times reshaped this grim trade. What's the most shocking medieval detail you've heard so far? Comment below, and let's brace for part 4's final descent. Hey guys, here we are, the final plunge into the medieval muck, where castles stood tall, chivalry was a cruel joke, and prostitutes like our friend Alara fought to survive in a world that chewed them up and spat them out. We've covered the gritty basics, royal scandals, siege-time chaos, and the hypocritical crusades. Now, in part 4, we're closing with the twilight of medieval prostitution, how the Black Death, shifting economies, and a new wave of moral panic reshaped this grim trade. It's a story of disease, desperation, and the faint glimmers of change, all wrapped in the same ironic absurdity and pain we've come to expect. What's been the most jaw-dropping moment in this series for you? Drop it in the comments, and let's wrap this nightmare up together. The Black Death. Oh, what a game changer. Sweeping through Europe from 1347 to 1351, this plague was like a cosmic reset button, wiping out up to half the population in some areas. Castles, those so-called impregnable fortresses, were no match for fleas carrying Yersinia pestis. The great halls, once buzzing with feasts, turned into makeshift hospitals or morgues, while the Bailey became a ghost town. For prostitutes like Alara, the plague was a double-edged sword. On one hand, demand for their services plummeted. Hard to sell company when everyone's coughing up their lungs or fleeing to the hills. On the other, desperation skyrocketed. With entire villages decimated, survivors flooded castle towns seeking protection, food, or work. Women who'd never considered prostitution, widows, orphans, abandoned servants, found themselves pushed into the trade to afford a crust of bread. The irony? The church blamed prostitutes for inviting the plague as divine punishment, yet castle lords still relied on them to keep their men distracted from the apocalypse outside. Alara, dodging plague-ridden clients, might have wrapped a cloth over her face not for modesty but to avoid the bad air everyone thought spread the disease. Survival tip: pray the next guy doesn't sneeze. Drop a comment. Would you have stayed in a plague-ravaged castle town or taken your chances in the countryside? Let's zoom into a post-plague castle, say Carcassonne in southern France, its double walls looming over a ravaged landscape. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it shook the feudal system to its core. Labor shortages meant serfs could demand better wages, and some women found new opportunities as weavers or brewers. But for many, the castle's shadow remained a trap. With fewer people, the demand for prostitutes didn't vanish. It just got weirder. Survivors, gripped by a live-for-today mentality, threw themselves into vice with reckless abandon. Chronicles from the 14th century England describe bacchanals in Castle Baileys, where soldiers, merchants, and even clergy partied like the world was ending, because frankly, it felt like it was. Prostitutes like Alara worked overtime, their earnings a mix of coins, food, or even looted goods from abandoned villages. But the pain? The plague didn't discriminate. Her clients could be carriers, and one wrong night could mean boils, fever, and a quick trip to a mass grave. Archaeological digs like those in London's Spitalfields reveal plague pits with women and children buried together, some likely prostitutes caught in the chaos. Survival was a grim lottery, and Alara's odds weren't great. Now, let's talk about the shifting economy, because nothing highlights medieval absurdity like money. The Black Death upended the feudal order, loosening the grip of lords and giving peasants a sliver of leverage. But for prostitutes, the change was bittersweet. In some castles, like those in the Low Countries, regulated brothels expanded as towns grew richer from trade. Places like Bruges saw stews pop up near castle walls, taxed and overseen by officials who saw vice as a revenue stream. The absurdity, a society preaching repentance after the plague still cashed in on sin. In England, castle towns like Winchester tightened regulations. Prostitutes had to register, wear their shameful stripes, and pay steeper fines. Alara might have faced a new bailiff, fresh from counting plague corpses, demanding a bigger cut of her earnings. The pain, higher taxes meant less food, and with disease still lingering, plague outbreaks recurred into the 15th century. Every day was a gamble. No sick days, no savings, just the endless grind of survival. The church, ever the moral arbiter, doubled down on its hypocrisy as the Middle Ages waned. The 15th century saw a new wave of moral panic, fueled by reformers like Bernardino of Siena, who preached fiery sermons against sodomites and harlots. In Italian castles, like those of the Sforza in Milan, prostitutes faced harsher punishments: public floggings, branding, or banishment to the wilderness, where bandits and wolves waited. Yet, the demand never stopped. Nobles, fresh from hearing mass, slipped into the bailey for a quick rendezvous. The irony, Bernardino's sermons packed churches, but the brothels stayed packed too. Alara, dodging a preacher's wrath, might have smirked at the sight of a bishop's retainer among her clients. The pain, moral crusades didn't save women, they scapegoated them. A 1421 record from Florence shows a prostitute named Lucia whipped for defiling a castle's honor, while her noble clients faced no penalty. Justice? A fairy tale for the naive. Let's pivot to the children one last time, because their story ties this nightmare together. The Black Death left countless orphans, some born to prostitutes, others pushed into the trade by circumstance. Castles, now understaffed, absorbed these kids as cheap labor. Scullery maids, stable hands, or worse, apprentices in the same grim trade as their mothers. A 14th century French chronicle mentions a girl, daughter of a common woman, working as a castle laundress at age 12, her mother dead from plague. The irony, the system that condemned these women relied on their kids to keep the castle running. The pain, no education, no escape, just a life of toil under the stigma of bastard or harlot spawn. Alara, if she had a child, might have hidden them from the bailiff's eye, knowing a convent or apprenticeship was their only shot at a better life, slim as that shot was. As the medieval period crept toward the Renaissance, castles began to lose their military dominance. Gunpowder and cannons made stone walls obsolete, and power shifted to cities and courts. Prostitution didn't vanish. It just moved, concentrating in urban brothels or royal palaces disguised as entertainments. In castles like those of the Tudor era, the trade became subtler, with courtesans replacing the blatant bailey hustlers. Women like Alara might have found new roles as serving maids with side gigs, their work less visible but no less desperate. The absurdity, society patted itself on the back for civilizing, yet the same exploitation persisted, just with fancier clothes. The pain, for every woman who climbed to courtesan status, like Agnes Sorel at the French court, thousands remained in the muck, their lives erased from the records. Let's wrap with a final look at Alara's world. Picture her in 1400, older now, her body scarred by disease and violence, yet still working the bailey of a crumbling castle. The plague's shadow lingers, The church's sermons echo, and the Lord's coins still flow. She survived sieges, purges, and starvation, but at what cost? Her child, if they lived, is a servant or gone, and her future is as bleak as the moat's stagnant water. The castle, once a symbol of power, is a decaying relic, its walls hiding the same sins they always did, the dark truth. Prostitutes like Alara were the unsung cogs of medieval life, despised, exploited, yet essential. The irony, we romanticize knights and castles, but their story was built on the backs of women who history forgot. And that's the end of our journey through the medieval underbelly. From castle shadows to crusade camps, from royal scandals to plague-ravaged towns, we've seen a world where survival was a cruel jest and hypocrisy reigned supreme. What's the biggest takeaway for you? Drop it in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Thanks for sticking with me through this grim saga. Until next time, keep questioning the fairy tales, and let's uncover more hidden truths together. Imagine this. You're standing in the heart of ancient Rome, the sun beating down on marble columns that gleam like they've been polished by the gods themselves. But wait, lean in closer, because beneath that grandeur lurks a steaming cesspool of horror. Yes, folks, today we're diving headfirst into the top 5 most revolting bathing habits of the ancient Romans. Habits so absurdly gross, they'll make you hug your modern shower like a long-lost lover. Buckle up, because if you think your gym locker room is bad, you've got no idea what's coming. This isn't just history, it's a nightmare you can smell from 2 millennia away. Ah, ancient Rome, the empire that conquered the world but couldn't conquer basic cleanliness. We romanticize them as these toga-wearing geniuses, building aqueducts and roads that still stand today. But let's be real, survival back then was a daily gauntlet of filth, disease, and decisions that make you wonder how humanity made it this far. Picture yourself as a lowly plebeian or even a smug senator, trudging through streets lined with overflowing gutters, only to relax in a public bath that doubles as a petri dish for every imaginable germ. It's ironic, isn't it? They obsessed over bathing like it was the pinnacle of civilization, yet their habits were a masterclass in self-sabotage. You'd think with all that engineering prowess, they'd invent soap, or at least a "do not disturb" sign for the toilet. Nope. Instead, they turned hygiene into a communal circus of absurdity. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll be thanking your lucky stars for antibacterial wipes. Let's set the scene properly, shall we? Rome at its peak, say around the time of Emperor Trajan in the 2nd century AD, when the city boasted over 1,000 public bathhouses. These weren't your spa day retreats with fluffy towels and essential oils. Oh no. The thermae were massive complexes, open to everyone from slaves to emperors, for a tiny fee or sometimes free. Sounds democratic, right? Wrong. It was a recipe for disaster. Men, women, children, all splashing around together in what essentially became a giant soup of human residue. And here's the kicker. The water wasn't changed daily, sometimes not even weekly. It sat there, warming under hypocaust floors heated by slave-stoked furnaces, collecting layers of sweat, dirt, and bodily fluids like a forgotten pot of stew. Imagine the aroma, a pungent mix of olive oil, unwashed skin, and whatever the guy next to you had for lunch. Delightful. But why stop at the basics? Our top 5 list kicks off with the granddaddy of disgust. Habit number 1, bathing in filthy, stagnant communal water. Oh, the irony. Romans prided themselves on cleanliness, yet they willingly stewed in water that modern health inspectors would condemn on sight. Let's immerse ourselves, pun absolutely intended, in the daily ritual. You'd enter the bathhouse after a long day of toiling in the forums or fighting in the legions, stripping down in the apoditerium, where attendants, often slaves, guarded your clothes from thieves. No lockers here, just hope and a prayer. Then you'd slather yourself with olive oil, because soap, what's that? They hadn't invented it yet, or at least didn't bother using it widely. Olive oil was their all-purpose lubricant, rubbed into every pore to loosen the dirt. From there, into the tepidarium, the warm room, to get your sweat on. Then the caldarium, the hot bath, where the real magic, or horror, happened. Picture a vast pool, maybe 50 feet across, filled with water piped in from aqueducts that, let's face it, weren't exactly filtered. That water had traveled miles, picking up lead from pipes. Hello, poisoning, bird droppings, and runoff from farms. Now, multiply that by hundreds of bathers per day, Men gossiping about politics, women chatting about scandals, kids splashing like it's a public pool party. But here's the absurd part. No draining the tub. The water recirculated, heated from below, but it didn't magically clean itself. Strabo, the ancient geographer, noted how these baths were hubs of social life, but he conveniently left out the floating bits of who knows what. Archaeologists have dug up these sites, like the baths of Caracalla, which could hold 1,600 people at once. Imagine the biomass. Studies of ancient sewage show spikes in parasites, whipworms, roundworms, you name it, right around the Roman era. Piers Mitchell, a paleopathologist, analyzed fossilized feces. Yes, that's a job, and found that despite all the bathing, Romans had more intestinal nasties than their Iron Age predecessors. Why? Because communal soaking spread everything faster than a rumor in the Senate. You'd emerge feeling refreshed, but really, you just traded your personal grime for everyone else's. Survival tip from the past. Don't drink the bathwater, though some probably did by accident, and the pain of it all. Think about the average Roman scraping by on bread and olives, dodging plagues like the Antonine one that killed millions. Bathing was supposed to be a respite, but it often turned into a vector for disease. Emperors like Nero or Hadrian frequented these places, mingling with the masses. How egalitarian. Except when the water turned murky brown, and you realized that relaxation meant risking dysentery. Sarcasm aside, it's a wonder they built an empire while marinating in their own filth. If you were a time traveler dropping in, you'd last 5 minutes before bolting for a decontamination shower. What about you? Would you dip a toe in a Roman bath or run screaming? Drop a comment below. Bonus points if you share your grossest modern equivalent. But wait, it gets worse. The Romans didn't just soak, they scraped. Which brings us seamlessly, or slimily, into habit number 2. Scraping skin with strigils and treasuring the gunk. The strigil. A curved metal tool that looks like a blunt sickle, used to rake off the olive oil, sweat, and dead skin after your steam session. Sounds efficient, right? In theory. In practice, it's like using a windshield wiper on your body, collecting a gooey paste called glomera, or strigmentum. And here's the historical absurdity. They didn't toss this stuff. Oh no. They collected it, bottled it, and sold it as medicine. Pliny the Elder, that encyclopedic busybody, wrote in his Natural History about how this mixture was prized for treating wounds, inflammation, even as a beauty product. Gladiator sweat was especially valuable. Fans would pay top denarius for vials of the stuff scraped from famous fighters. Imagine, you're at the Colosseum, cheering on your hero, then buying his body crud to rub on your aches. It's like modern celebrities selling their bathwater, but way grosser and without the irony. Women used it as conditioner, men as a salve. The pain of survival? In a world without antibiotics, you'd slather on this bacterial buffet hoping it cured your boil, only to get an infection instead. Let's paint a vivid picture. You're in the unctorium, the oiling room, post-bath. A slave hands you a strigil, hopefully cleaned, but who knows. You scrape away, the tool gliding over oiled skin, peeling off layers of grime accumulated from dusty roads and smoky homes. The sound? A satisfying schlick-schlick, like sanding wood. But the result? A pile of grayish sludge that smells like a gym sock left in olive brine, and instead of flushing it, attendants scoop it up for the market. Celsus, the medical writer, recommended it for skin conditions. Modern science? We'd call it a biohazard. The sarcasm drips here. Romans, inventors of concrete and law, reduced to hawking human residue. It's absurdly entrepreneurial, sure, but at what cost? Diseases spread like wildfire. Skin infections, ectoparasites thriving in the warm, moist environments, lice, fleas, bedbugs, all partying in the baths. Martial, the poet, complained about bathhouse pests in his epigrams, joking about thieves stealing more than clothes. Survival was tough. One wrong scrape, and you're itching for weeks. Or worse, contracting something fatal. Yet they kept at it, convinced this was peak hygiene. If only they knew we'd one day have exfoliating scrubs that don't come from gladiator armpits. Engage with me here. What's more, nightmare fuel. Sharing bathwater with strangers or buying their scraped-off filth. Comment your vote, and tell me if you'd try strigil therapy today. I bet some hipster spa would market it as ancient wellness. Now, as we wade deeper into this cesspool of history, let's not forget the social side. Baths weren't just for cleaning, they were networking events. Gyms, libraries, all rolled into one germy package. You'd exercise in the palestra, sweat it out, then plunge into the frigidarium's cold pool to close the pores. But amid the chatter, deals were made, romances sparked, and yes, bodily functions ignored. Which tees up our transition, but since we're pacing this nightmare, let's linger on the absurdity a bit longer. Think about the engineering marvel. Hypocaust systems, underfloor heating with hot air from furnaces. Slaves toiled in the dark, feeding wood or charcoal, inhaling smoke while the elite lounged above. The irony, all that tech for a system that amplified filth. Water heated to near boiling in the caldarium, but without chlorine or filters, it bred bacteria. Seneca described the baths as noisy, smelly chaos. Grunts from weightlifters, slaps from masseurs, vendors hawking sausages. Sausages! In a bathhouse. You'd munch while soaking, crumbs floating away. Survival pain, food poisoning on top of everything else. And the mixed bathing? In some eras, men and women bathed separately, but often not. Emperor Hadrian tried to regulate it, but rules were bent. Imagine the awkwardness, or worse, the harassment, in a culture where nudity was normalized, but power imbalances weren't. It's a sarcastic nod to progress. They had gender equality and grossness, at least. But enough setup. Let's double down on Habit 1's horrors. Archaeological digs at Pompeii reveal bath drains clogged with hair, bones, even jewelry, lost in the murk. The water's surface? A skim of oil and scum like a neglected hot tub. Yet Romans raved about it. Vitruvius, the architect, prescribed bath designs for health, ignoring the microbial soup. Modern recreations? Tourists visit ruins, but no one fills them up. For good reason. If you did, it'd be a bioweapon. The pain of the past hits hard here. Life expectancy? Around 25 to 30 years, thanks to hygiene fails like this. Infants died from contaminated water, adults from sepsis. Yet they persisted, building bigger baths like Diocletian's, spanning acres. Absurd resilience or stubborn denial? You decide. Comment your thoughts on Roman stubbornness. Shifting to Habit 2's finer points. The strigil wasn't just a tool, it was a status symbol. Wealthy Romans had silver ones, engraved. Slaves did the scraping for them, collecting the glomera in special jars. Galen, the physician, prescribed it for everything from arthritis to melancholy. But the gunk, full of staph, strep, who knows? It's like using a dirty razor daily. Historical anecdotes abound. Emperor Commodus bathed 7 times a day, scraping obsessively. Nero had baths of ass's milk, extravagant, but still gross. Cleopatra, borrowed from Romans, but that's another story. The sarcasm, they conquered germs by ignoring them. Survival, a lottery. If you avoided the baths, you stank. If you went, you risked death. What a choice. As part 1 winds down, remember, this is just the beginning. We've soaked in stagnant water and scraped off the scum, but 3 more habits await, each grosser than the last. Stay tuned for part 2, where we tackle urine's miracle uses and shared toilet nightmares. Would you trade your bathroom for a Roman thermi? Comment no, and why. Your survival stories keep the conversation alive. Welcome back, brave souls, to our revolting journey through the top 5 most disgusting bathing habits of the ancient Romans. If you thought part 1 was a stomach-churning dip into the cesspool of history, buckle up, things are about to get even nastier. Picture yourself back in ancient Rome, where the air hums with the stench of ambition, sweat, and questionable life choices. We've already waded through stagnant communal bathwater and scraped off gladiator gunk with strigils, but now we're diving deeper into the absurdity. If you're new here, you're in for a treat, or a trauma. Let's just say the Romans turned hygiene into a circus of horrors that makes your worst plumbing mishap look like a spa day. Ready for part 2? Let's plunge in and pray we don't drown. We left off with the nightmare of shared bathwater and bottled body scum, but the Romans, bless their filthy hearts, had more tricks up their togas. Habit number 3. Using urine as a miracle cleanser. Yes, you heard that right. Urine. The liquid gold of Rome wasn't just for marking territory, it was a cornerstone of their so-called hygiene. In a world without Colgate or Listerine, the Romans looked at a jug of pee and thought, genius. The irony is thicker than the sludge in their bathhouses. They believed urine's ammonia content made it a magical elixir for cleaning everything from teeth to laundry to, brace yourself, their faces. Survival in ancient Rome meant embracing the absurd, and nothing screams absurdity like gargling with what you flushed this morning. Let's set the scene. You're a Roman, Maybe a merchant in the Sabura district, dodging carts of fish sauce and street vendors yelling about their wares. Your teeth are yellowing from a diet of garum and lentils, and your breath could knock out a legion. What's the solution? Not a mint leaf? Those are for fancy people. Instead, you head to the local Phalonica, the laundry shop, where vats of human and animal urine sit fermenting like a cursed winery. Fullers, the unsung heroes of Roman cleanliness, collected urine from public toilets and even placed jars on street corners for passers-by to contribute. Pliny the Elder, our go-to for questionable life advice, raved about urine's bleaching powers in his Natural History. It whitened togas, softened wool, and apparently made your smile sparkle. But here's the kicker. They didn't stop at laundry. Romans used urine as a mouthwash. Wealthy patricians imported the finest urine, often from Portugal, because apparently some pee was more prestigious than others. They'd swish it around, convinced it killed germs and whitened teeth. Modern dentistry begs to differ. Urine's ammonia might strip enamel, but it's also a bacterial playground. Imagine the pain of survival, a toothache in a world without Novocaine, and your best fix is gargling with someone's recycled wine. Celsus, the medical writer, recommended it for oral health, but he also thought bleeding patients cured fevers, so his track record's spotty. The absurdity doesn't end there. Urine was a skincare staple. Women mixed it with pumice to exfoliate, believing it gave them that dewy, goddess-like glow. Men used it to treat sores, burns, even baldness, because nothing says confidence like a urine-soaked scalp. Martial, the snarky poet, mocked a friend for using it as a face wash, joking that his wrinkles smelled worse than the Tiber River. And the smell. Ammonia's sharp tang lingered on clothes, skin, hair. You'd walk out of a bathhouse, freshly cleaned, reeking like a public latrine. If you think your coworker's BO is bad, try sitting next to a Roman senator post-urine spa treatment. Engage with me here. Would you try a Roman urine facial for $1 million? Or is this where you draw the line? Drop a comment with your limit, teeth, skin, or laundry. And if you've got a grosser hygiene hack from history or today, I want to hear it. The pain of survival hits hard with this one. Urine wasn't sterile once it left the body. It festered in clay pots under the Mediterranean sun, breeding bacteria faster than a gladiator's fan base. Parasites like schistosomiasis, spread through contaminated water and poor hygiene, plagued Rome. Mitchell's paleopathology studies show spikes in these infections during the empire's peak, partly because of habits like this. Yet Romans doubled down, believing their ancestors' wisdom trumped common sense. It's sarcastic gold. An empire that mapped the stars but thought pee was a cure-all. Now let's pivot to habit number 4, sharing toilet sponges with strangers. If urine as mouthwash made you gag, this one's a knockout punch. The Romans invented aqueducts but indoor plumbing? Spotty at best. Public latrines were their pride and joy, rows of stone seats over running water where you'd sit elbow to elbow with your neighbors, chatting about the weather while doing your business. Sounds cozy, right? Except for the cleaning method. The xylospongium, a stick with a sea sponge tied to the end, dipped in vinegar or salt water and passed around like a communal dish towel. Yes, you shared it. With everyone. Picture the Forica, Rome's largest public toilet with 60 seats in a semicircle. No stalls, no privacy, just you, your toga hitched up, and a dozen strangers swapping gossip and germs. The sponge stick was kept in a water channel or bucket, supposedly cleaned between uses. But let's be real, that vinegar rinse wasn't killing E. coli. Seneca griped about the latrine's stench, describing the unpleasant noises echoing off marble walls. Juvenal, another poet, mocked the lack of dignity, but even he used them. Survival meant grinning and bearing it, or wiping and sharing it. The horror deepens when you consider logistics. Sponges wore out, got soggy, harbored bacteria. No one was sterilizing them, slaves might rinse them, but rinse is generous. Archaeological digs at Pompeii and Herculaneum reveal latrine drains choked with waste, suggesting maintenance was lax. Diseases like dysentery and typhoid spread easily in these conditions. The Antonine Plague, which ravaged Rome in the 160s AD, likely got a boost from such practices. Imagine the pain. A stomach bug in a city with no Imodium, and your only relief is a shared sponge that's been everywhere. The irony? Romans saw public latrines as civilized. They were social hubs, like baths, where deals were struck and friendships forged. Some even had frescoes or statues, as if art could mask the smell. Emperors funded them to win public favor, Vespasian famously taxed urine collection, joking, "Money doesn't stink." Oh, but it did. Survival was a gamble. One wrong wipe, and you're praying to Asclepius for mercy. Let's get interactive. Would you rather share a Roman sponge stick or bathe in their stagnant water? Comment your pick and tell me how you'd survive a day in a Roman latrine. Bonus points for creative escape plans. Now, let's linger on the absurdity. These latrines were engineering marvels. Sewage flowed to the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer. But clogs were common, and backups turned latrines into swamps. In wealthier homes, private toilets existed, but even those often used the same sponge system. The rich might have fancier sticks, ivory maybe, but the principle was the same. Communal cleaning, zero hygiene. Galen warned about infections from public facilities, but no one listened. They were too busy debating philosophy while passing the sponge. The social angle adds another layer of nightmare. Latrines were mixed gender at times, though less often than baths. Imagine the awkward eye contact, the forced small talk. Nice weather, Lucius. Pass the sponge? Women especially faced indignity, with little privacy and constant exposure. Yet they went, because what choice was there? Outhouses outside the city were worse, dark, rat-infested pits. The pain of survival meant enduring public scrutiny and health risks just to relieve yourself. Let's double down on Habit 3's grossness. Urine wasn't just for personal use, it was an industry. Fullers processed thousands of liters daily, stomping clothes in urine vats like grapes in a winery. The stench wafted through Rome, blending with the bath's aroma. Diodorus Siculus noted how fullers were shunned socially, yet their work was essential. Romans wore bright togas thanks to urine's bleaching, but at what cost? Skin rashes, respiratory issues from ammonia fumes, and a lingering smell no perfume could mask. Habit 4's sponge sticks weren't universal. Some used pottery shards or leaves, which weren't much better. Shards could cut, leaves disintegrated. The sponge was the luxury option, yet it spread infections like wildfire. Modern parallels? Think of the dirtiest public restroom you've encountered, then remove the soap and add a shared rag. That's Rome. As we wrap part 2, the sarcasm flows. Romans built an empire but couldn't build a better toilet. Their bathing habits were a paradox, obsessed with cleanliness, yet drowning in filth. We've got one final habit to uncover in part 3, and trust me, it's the cherry on this Putuid Sunday. Will you stick around for the grand finale? Comment your grossest takeaway so far, and let's see who's brave enough to keep watching this historical horror show. Welcome back, you gluttons for punishment, to our third plunge into the rancid waters of ancient Roman bathing habits. If you're still here after wading through stagnant bathwater, scraped off body gunk, urine facials, and shared toilet sponges, you're either a history nerd or just love a good gag reflex challenge. We're counting down the top 5 most revolting hygiene practices of Rome, and let me tell you, the absurdity is peaking. The Romans, with their aqueducts and marble statues, thought they were the pinnacle of civilization, but their bathrooms tell a different story, one of survival, stench, and sheer lunacy. Part 3 is where we hit the final, most nauseating habit, so grab your nose plugs and let's dive into the cesspool of history one more time. Trust me, this one's so vile, you'll be kissing your modern plumbing in gratitude. Let's recap the nightmare so far. We've soaked in communal baths that doubled as disease incubators, scraped our skin with strigils to collect medicinal sludge, gargled urine like it was mouthwash, and wiped with a communal sponge stick that probably carried more bacteria than a gladiator's armpit. The irony? Romans thought they were cleaner than the barbarians they conquered. Spoiler, they weren't. Their obsession with bathing was a masterclass in self-delusion, turning every trip to the Thermae into a gamble with dysentery, parasites, or worse. Survival in Rome meant dodging death daily, and the bathhouse was less a spa and more a biohazard zone. If you're imagining a toga-clad influencer touting Roman wellness tips, you're in for a rude awakening. Now, brace for habit number 5, bathing with raw sewage runoff. Yes, you read that correctly. The Romans, for all their engineering genius, didn't quite master the art of keeping their bathwater separate from their sewage. This is the crowning jewel of their disgusting habits, the one that makes you wonder how they built an empire while swimming in literal filth. Let's paint the picture. You're in Rome, say, during the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, around 200 AD. The city's a million-strong metropolis, buzzing with markets, temples, and bathhouses like the massive baths of Caracalla. You stroll into one, expecting a refreshing dip after a day dodging ox carts and pickpockets. Instead, you're greeted by a steaming pool fed by aqueducts that, surprise, often doubled as the city's waste disposal system. Here's how it worked. Or didn't. Rome's aqueducts were marvels, carrying fresh water from distant springs to feed fountains, baths, and latrines. But fresh is a stretch. These channels weren't sealed like modern pipes. They were open to the elements, collecting debris, animal waste, and runoff from fields fertilized with manure. Worse, the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer, sometimes backed up, especially during floods. When that happened, sewage could flow into the same aqueducts feeding the baths. Juvenal, our favorite grumpy poet, complained about the Tiber River's stench, hinting at how waste contaminated everything downstream. Bathhouses, often built near rivers or drainage systems, weren't immune. Archaeological digs at sites like Ostia show drainage pipes from latrines running perilously close to bathhouse inlets. One bad storm, and you're soaking in Rome's collective outhouse. The pain of survival here is visceral. Imagine slipping into the caldarium, the hot bath, expecting to sweat out your stress. The water's warm, courtesy of the Hippocaust system, but it's also murky with a suspicious sheen. You try to ignore the floating bits. Hair, food scraps, maybe worse. You're not just bathing with strangers, you're bathing with their waste. Studies of Roman skeletal remains, like those from Herculaneum, show high rates of gastroenteritis and parasitic infections linked to contaminated water. Piers Mitchell's work on ancient poop, yes, still a job, reveals tapeworms, roundworms, and other nasties thriving in Roman cities. Bathing, meant to cleanse, often made things worse. The Antonine Plague, the plague of Cyprian. Epidemics tore through Rome partly because of habits like this. No wonder life expectancy hovered around 30. The sarcasm drips like the sludge in those pipes. Romans boasted about their hygiene, writing treatises on health while ignoring the obvious. Their baths were open sewers. Vitruvius, the architect, waxed poetic about bathhouse design but never mentioned filtration. Why? Because they didn't have it. Water was heated, circulated, but rarely replaced. Some baths had overflow systems, but these often dumped into nearby rivers, which then fed other baths downstream. It's a cycle of filth that makes you want to shower just thinking about it. If you were a Roman, your survival strategy was simple. Pray to Juno you didn't catch something fatal while relaxing. Let's get you involved. Would you take a dip in a Roman bath knowing it might be sewage tainted, or would you stick to dry land? Comment below with your survival plan. Would you hold your breath, bribe a slave for fresh water, or just flee to Gaul? And if you've ever encountered a modern plumbing disaster, share it. I bet it's still better than this. Now, let's linger on the absurdity. Bathhouses were social hubs, packed with senators cutting deals, merchants haggling, and philosophers pontificating, all while floating in questionable liquid. The rich had private baths, but even those weren't safe. Lead pipes, used everywhere, leached toxins into the water. Pliny the Younger described his villa's bath with pride, but didn't mention the lead poisoning that likely gave him headaches. The poor, stuck with public baths, faced worse odds. Women, often bathing alongside men in mixed sessions, dealt with harassment on top of health risks. Emperor Hadrian tried to regulate mixed bathing, but enforcement was lax. Imagine the awkwardness. You're dodging leers while trying not to notice the water's texture. The engineering irony is staggering. The Romans built aqueducts spanning hundreds of miles but couldn't keep their water clean. The Aqua Virgo, one of Rome's purest aqueducts, still picked up silt and worse. Maintenance was a nightmare. Slaves cleaned the channels, but not often enough. Frontinus, Rome's water commissioner, bragged about the system's efficiency, but even he admitted leaks and illegal taps muddied the supply. Meanwhile, bathhouse attendants tossed in perfumes or herbs to mask the smell, because nothing says clean like lavender-scented sewage. Let's double down on Habit 5's horrors. Some baths used rainwater cisterns, but these were no better. Stagnant, mosquito-filled pools breeding disease. In smaller towns, baths relied on local streams which doubled as dumping grounds. At Pompeii, archaeologists found bathhouse drains clogged with everything from bones to broken pottery, proof that clean was a fantasy. And the smell? Seneca described bathhouses as reeking of sweat and worse, yet Romans kept coming back. It was cultural pride. Barbarians stank, Romans bathed. Never mind that the barbarians with their simple river dips might have been healthier. The social angle adds another layer of nightmare. Bathhouses were open to all classes, which sounds egalitarian until you realize that meant everyone's germs mingled freely. Slaves, fresh from cleaning latrines, bathed beside patricians. Kids, notorious for poor hygiene, splashed in the same pools. Petronius, in his Satyricon, mocked the chaos. Vendors selling snacks, masseurs shouting, bathers arguing over space. You'd munch a sausage while floating in filth, because why not? Survival meant ignoring the obvious, like the fact that your refreshing dip might kill you. Let's revisit habit 3 for a moment, because urine's role ties into this sewage saga. Fullers dumped their used urine vats into the same sewers feeding the baths. Vespasian's urine tax funded infrastructure, but didn't improve it. The result? A city where waste cycled endlessly. Latrine to sewer, to aqueduct, to bath. It's a closed loop of disgust, and the Romans were proud of it. Martial's epigrams poke fun at the stench, but he still bathed daily. What choice did he have? Skip the baths, and you're a social pariah. Go, and you risk your life. That's the Roman paradox. Habit 4's sponge sticks make a grim cameo here too. Latrines, often adjacent to baths, shared drainage systems. A clogged toilet could back up into the bathhouse, mixing sponge-rinsed waste with your soak. Excavations at Ephesus show latrine and bath pipes intertwined, a plumbing disaster waiting to happen. The pain? Imagine a stomach bug from a bad sponge, only to cleanse in sewage-tainted water. No wonder Galen's medical texts are full of infection remedies, none of which worked well. As we near the end of part 3, the sarcasm is thick. Romans conquered the world but couldn't conquer their own filth. Habit 5 is the ultimate proof, an empire of engineers defeated by basic sanitation. One more part awaits, where we'll wrap this nightmare and reflect on why Romans thought this was fine. Will you stick around to see how this ends? Comment your grossest moment from this part, sewage baths or urine mouthwash, and tell me, would you survive a week in Rome, or are you booking a time machine back to now? Here we are, you brave or masochistic souls, at the final chapter of our rancid odyssey through the top 5 most disgusting bathing habits of the ancient Romans. If you've survived the stagnant bathwater, gladiator gunk, urine mouthwash, shared sponge sticks, and sewage-soaked pools, you deserve a medal, or at least a hazmat suit. Welcome to part 4, where we tie up this nightmare with a putrid bow and reflect on why the Romans thought their hygiene was the gold standard while swimming in what we'd call a biohazard. The irony is sharper than a gladiator's sword. These toga-wearing conquerors built an empire but couldn't outsmart their own filth. So, let's wrap this up with a sarcastic smirk, a shudder, and a call to cherish your modern shower. Ready for the finale? Let's wade in one last time. We've covered a lot of ground, or sludge, since we started. Habit 1 had us stewing in communal bathwater, a lukewarm soup of sweat, dirt, and who knows what, shared by everyone from senators to slaves. Habit 2 introduced the strigil, that metal scraper collecting medicinal goo sold as a cure-all, because nothing says health like gladiator armpit paste. Habit 3 brought the horror of urine as a miracle cleanser, mouthwash, skincare, laundry whitener, you name it. Habit 4 was the communal toilet sponge, passed around like a cursed party favor in latrines with zero privacy. And Habit 5? Bathing in sewage runoff, where aqueducts and sewers played a deadly game of mix and match. Each habit is a testament to Roman resilience, or delusion, turning survival into a daily dance with disease. The pain? Constant. The absurdity? Off the charts. Let's linger on Habit 5 to set the stage for our finale. Picture yourself in a grand bathhouse, say the baths of Diocletian, around 300 AD. Marble walls gleam, mosaics dazzle, but the water? A murky stew, thanks to Rome's plumbing woes. Aqueducts brought water from miles away, but open channels meant they scooped up manure, debris, and worse. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's sewer, was a marvel until it overflowed, sending waste back into the system. Excavations at sites like Ostia reveal bathhouse pipes perilously close to latrine drains. One flood, and you're soaking in Rome's collective excrement. Juvenal's poems hint at the stench, yet Romans flocked to these baths, convinced they were cleaner than the filthy Gauls. The sarcasm drips. They mocked barbarians while marinating in their own waste. The health toll was brutal. Parasites like whipworms and tapeworms thrived, as Piers Mitchell's studies of ancient feces show. Epidemics like the plague of Cyprian in the 200s and 50s AD spread faster because of these habits. Bathing was supposed to heal, but it often killed. Galen the physician prescribed baths for everything from fever to melancholy, ignoring the bacteria breeding in the water. Survival meant gambling with every dip. Would you catch dysentery or just a rash? Life expectancy was 25 to 30 years, and habits like these didn't help. If you were a Roman, you'd bathe daily, not because it worked, but because skipping it made you a social outcast. Talk about peer pressure. Now, let's step back and ask, why did the Romans do this? Why embrace habits that make us gag from 2 millennia away? The answer lies in their culture, a mix of arrogance, tradition, and a shocking lack of germ theory. Romans saw bathing as a mark of civilization, a daily ritual separating them from savages. Bathhouses weren't just for cleaning, they were social clubs, political arenas, even gyms. Seneca described the chaos: grunts from weightlifters, vendors hawking snacks, masseurs slapping backs. You'd negotiate a deal while nibbling a sausage, ignoring the floating scum. It was a flex. Rome's wealth funded free or cheap baths for all, from plebeians to emperors. Skipping them? Unthinkable. You'd be the guy who smells worse than the Tiber. The irony is delicious. Romans built aqueducts that still stand, but couldn't filter their water. They wrote laws that shaped the modern world, but thought urine was toothpaste. Their engineering was genius. Hippocausts heated floors with precision, but their hygiene was a disaster. Frontinus, the water commissioner, boasted about Rome's aqueducts, yet admitted they were often contaminated. Pliny the Elder's Natural History reads like a love letter to bad ideas, praising urine and strigil gunk as medical miracles. They lacked microscopes, sure, but you'd think the smell would have been a clue. Instead, they doubled down, building bigger baths like Trajan's, which could hold thousands. It's absurd, an empire that conquered nations, defeated by basic sanitation. Let's tie the habits together for a grim picture. Start your day at the bathhouse. You strip in the apoditerium, hoping no one steals your toga. You slather on olive oil, no soap, because why innovate, and sweat in the tepidarium. Then, into the caldarium's hot pool, where sewage from a recent flood mingles with the water. You scrape off the oil with a strigil, the slave collecting the glomera for some quack's pharmacy. Need a latrine break? Grab the communal sponge stick, give it a quick vinegar rinse, and pray it's not carrying last week's plague. Feeling fancy? Swish some imported urine for that sparkling smile. You emerge, reeking of ammonia and hubris, thinking you're the cleanest guy in Rome. Survival? A miracle. The social dynamics add another layer of horror. Bathhouses were egalitarian in theory. Everyone bathed, but class divisions persisted. The rich had slaves to scrape them. The poor did it themselves. Women faced harassment in mixed baths, yet had no choice but to go. Slaves, fresh from cleaning sewers, jumped in the same pools as patricians. Kids splashed around, spreading who knows what. Petronius's Satyricon paints a vivid scene. Crowded, noisy, chaotic, with bathers ignoring the obvious filth. It was a microcosm of Rome, grand, flawed, and smelly. Let's engage you one last time. Which habit makes you want to burn your toga and run? Sewage baths, urine facials, sponge sticks? Comment your pick and tell me how you'd survive a day in Rome's bathhouses. Would you bribe an attendant for a private tub, or just hold it in forever? Bonus points for your worst modern hygiene horror story. Let's see if it tops Rome's madness. Now let's reflect on the pain of survival. Romans faced constant threats: plagues, wars, lead poisoning from pipes. Bathing was their escape, a ritual to feel civilized. But it was a trap. Parasites, bacteria, and infections lurked in every pool. Martial's epigrams mock the bathhouse stench, yet he bathed daily. Why? Social pressure, and no alternatives. Private baths were rare, and still used the same tainted water. Avoiding baths meant isolation, and in Rome, connections were everything. The absurdity is that they knew it wasn't perfect. Seneca griped, Juvenal sneered, but they kept going. It's like us sticking to a bad habit because it's tradition. The sarcasm peaks here. Romans thought they were gods among men, but their hygiene was a divine comedy of errors. They'd laugh at us for our antibacterial obsession, yet we're the ones living past 30. Their baths were architectural wonders, but functional disasters. The baths of Caracalla, with their soaring domes, hosted thousands daily, yet no one questioned the water's brown tinge. It's a lesson in hubris. Brilliance in one area doesn't mean smarts in all. As we close, let's imagine a Roman time traveler in your bathroom. They'd marvel at your hot shower, your soap, your flush toilet. They'd call you decadent for not sharing your sponge with the neighborhood. And you'd laugh, knowing their clean was a death sentence. The Roman bathing obsession was a paradox, meant to purify. It poisoned. Yet they persisted, building an empire despite it all. Maybe that's the real marvel, their stubborn survival. So, what's the verdict? Are you Team Roman bath, or are you hugging your shower head? Comment your final thoughts, rank the habits from gross to grossest, and tell me if you'd last a day in Rome. If you love this dive into history's cesspool, share your favorite disgusting fact. Let's keep the conversation as lively as a Roman latrine. Until next time, stay clean, and thank your lucky stars you're not bathing in 200 AD. Hey there, imagine scrolling through your DNA results and spotting a Neanderthal staring back. Your great times 1,000 grandpa, courtesy of some prehistoric hanky-panky that shaped who you are today. But hold on, the real story of how our ancestors mixed it up with these burly cave dwellers is a twisted tale of survival, awkward encounters, and genetic gifts that come with a side of ancient agony. Picture this. It's 50,000 years ago, give or take a millennium, because let's face it, prehistoric calendars weren't exactly precise. The world is a frozen nightmare, the ice age gripping Europe and Asia like a bad hangover that won't quit. Woolly mammoths stomp around like oversized elephants on steroids, saber-toothed tigers lurk in the shadows waiting to turn you into lunch, and early modern humans, our Homo sapiens ancestors, are stumbling out of Africa, wide-eyed and woefully unprepared for the chill. They're clever, sure, with their fancy tools and budding art skills, but survival? It's a daily dice roll against starvation, predators, and that nagging cough that could be the end of your line. Oh, the irony. We romanticize cavemen as rugged heroes, but really, they were just trying not to die in a world that hated them. Enter the Neanderthals, the original locals of this frosty hellscape. These guys had been toughing it out in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, their stocky builds and big noses perfectly adapted to the cold. Think of them as the ultimate survivalists. If survival meant huddling in damp caves, scraping meat off, bones with stone flakes, and hoping the fire didn't go out. But here's the absurd part. Despite their brute strength and brain power, yeah, their brains were bigger than ours. Take that, modern ego. They were on the brink. Climate swings, low population numbers, and now these skinny newcomers from the south show up, competing for the same caves and game. What do you do when invaders crash your party? Well, apparently, you don't just fight, you flirt. DNA doesn't lie, folks, and recent genetic sleuthing has peeled back the curtain on this prehistoric soap opera. Turns out, our ancestors didn't just bump into Neanderthals, they got busy, interbreeding in ways that left traces in our genes today. Non-African folks carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, a quirky inheritance that influences everything from your skin tone to your immune system. But the pain of it all. Imagine being a Homo sapiens woman, fresh from the African savannas, shivering in a Eurasian cave, and your date is a Neanderthal guy who's never heard of deodorant. Survival meant alliances, and sometimes that alliance was sealed with a roll in the mammoth fur. Drop a comment below. If you could time travel back, would you swipe right on a Neanderthal or run for the hills? Let's dive deeper into the absurdity of this mixing. The first big clues came from sequencing the Neanderthal genome back in 2010, but science keeps dropping bombshells. Fast forward to recent studies, and we've got a timeline that's as messy as a cave floor after a hunt. One pulse of interbreeding happened around 47,000 years ago, lasting a whopping 7,000 years. A long, drawn-out affair where humans and Neanderthals coexisted, clashed, and canoodled across Eurasia. Picture small bands of sapiens wandering into Neanderthal territory, maybe trading tools or sharing a fire during a blizzard. Next thing you know, kids are born with a mix of traits. Sapiens' slender frames, but Neanderthals' robust jaws or fair skin to soak up that scarce northern sun. But, oh, the historical nightmare. Life back then was no picnic. Neanderthals lived in groups of maybe 10 to 20, scraping by on hunted meat and gathered plants, their bodies battered by injuries from close quarters hunting, spearing mammoths up close. Yeah, that left scars, broken bones, and early deaths. Our sapiens ancestors weren't faring much better, migrating into unknown lands with kids in tow, facing famines that could wipe out half a clan. Interbreeding wasn't some romantic choice, it was desperation. A Neanderthal band, decimated by disease or a harsh winter, might absorb a few sapiens stragglers, or vice versa. Sapiens groups, low on numbers, welcoming Neanderthal wanderers for that genetic boost. The irony drips like cave water. We owe our survival to these extinct cousins, yet we outlasted them, absorbing their essence while they faded away. Think about the kids from these unions. the first hybrids. Recent finds, like a 140,000-year-old skull from Israel's School Cave, suggest even earlier mixing, perhaps the world's oldest human Neanderthal child. This little one grew up in a world of blended families, but survival? Brutal. Hybrid vigor might have given them an edge, stronger immune systems from Neanderthal genes helping fight off new pathogens. But the pain was real. Imagine a child with a sapiens mom's storytelling flair and a Neanderthal dad's burly strength, yet still vulnerable to the elements. Caves were dark, smoky dens where infections festered, and childbirth? A gamble that killed many mothers, hybrid or not. These kids might have inherited genes for lighter skin and hair, useful in low UV latitudes, but also predispositions to things like type 2 diabetes or nicotine addiction. Thanks, Neanderthals, for that ironic legacy. And the absurdity amps up with multiple waves of mixing. Princeton geneticists recently mapped over 200,000 years of interactions, showing not just one big event, but recurrent gene flow. Neanderthals weren't isolated. They mingled with early humans multiple times, even as far back as 250,000 years ago. Wait, what? That means some sapiens left Africa way earlier, hooked up with Neanderthals, and then their descendants looped back. It's like a prehistoric family reunion gone wild, with genes ping-ponging across continents. But the nightmare. Travel meant trekking through ice sheets, dodging predators, and hoping you didn't starve. One study from Berkeley pins a key interbreeding event at 48,000 years ago, right after sapiens left Africa en masse. These encounters weren't peaceful picnics. They involved conflict, cooperation, and coerced unions in a lawless world. Let's immerse in a day-in-the-life scenario to feel the sarcasm-worthy horror. Meet Zara, a fictional sapiens woman based on those ancient bones. She's part of a band fleeing drought in the Middle East, stumbling into Neanderthal lands in what's now Europe. The group is ragged, half-starved, with blistered feet from endless walking. They spot smoke from a cave. Neanderthals inside, roasting deer over a fire. Do you attack? Trade? Run? In this case, tentative peace. Shared meat. Exchanged flint tools. Zara catches the eye of a Neanderthal hunter. Let's call him Gronk. Broad-shouldered, with a brow ridge that screams, evolutionary relic. Their romance? More like survival pact. Nights in the cave, huddling for warmth as wolves howl outside. Zara bears a child, a hybrid boy with Gronk's strength and her ingenuity. But the pain, infections from untreated wounds, constant hunger, and the ever-present fear of raids from rival groups. Gronk's clan accepts the kid, but whispers of otherness linger. Survival means teaching the boy to hunt, gather, and endure. A far cry from our cushy lives. Now, zoom out to the genetic gifts and curses. Neanderthal DNA helped us conquer new environments. Genes for keratin make our hair straighter and thicker, better for cold climates. Immune boosters from them let us fend off Eurasian bugs that could have wiped us out. One study shows Neanderthal variants in our noses help detect odors better, handy for spotting rotten food or predators. But the irony, some of those genes backfire today. They contribute to autoimmune diseases like lupus or Crohn's, or even make us more prone to severe COVID-19. Thanks, ancient hookups, for the double-edged sword. And get this, Neanderthals might have gotten the short end, absorbing sapiens genes that disrupted their populations. Recent research suggests gene flow went both ways, but we thrived while they vanished around 40,000 years ago. Was it climate? Competition? Or did our hybrid edge doom them? Drop a comment. Which Neanderthal trait do you think you inherited? Super smell, or that pesky allergy? The absurdity peaks with how we view them now. Victorian scientists painted Neanderthals as dumb brutes, but DNA flips the script. They buried their dead, made art, and even used eagle talons as jewelry. Yet their extinction is a poignant reminder of history's cruelty. Small populations meant inbreeding depression. Add sapiens' arrival, and it's a recipe for fade-out. But through mixing, they live on in us. 2% of your genome whispering ancient survival stories. The pain, entire lineages lost, cultures erased, all for our species' dominance. As we wrap part 1, consider this. Without those prehistoric mixers, humanity might not have survived the Ice Age's wrath. Neanderthals gave us the genetic toolkit to endure, yet we barely acknowledge them beyond memes. In part 2, we'll delve into specific hybrid fossils, the drama of multiple waves, and how these genes shaped our evolution's wild ride. What's your take on this ancient mingling? Romantic or ruthless? Comment below and stay tuned for more prehistoric absurdity. But wait, there's more to this genetic tango. Let's explore the earlier encounters, because DNA hints at mixings as far back as 140,000 years ago. That's before sapiens even left Africa in big numbers. Perhaps small exploratory groups ventured out, met Neanderthals in the Levant, and sparked the first hybrids. The skull cave child, with its mixed features, stands as a testament. A skull blending sapiens' high forehead with Neanderthals' robust teeth. Imagine the confusion in that family. Sapiens' parents raising a kid who's stronger but maybe slower to speak. The nightmare. The Middle East back then was a crossroads of species, with Denisovans thrown in for extra chaos. Denisovans? Another cousin, known mostly from DNA in Asians and Oceanians, adding 4 to 6% to some genomes. But Neanderthals take the spotlight for their Eurasian dominance. Recent 2024 studies refine this. Two teams using different methods agree on a 50,000-year start for major interbreeding, but with pulses lasting millennia. One method analyzes genome segments, tracking how Neanderthal chunks break up over generations, like genetic breadcrumbs leading back to the hookup era. The other uses ancient DNA from early sapiens fossils, like those from Bachokiro Cave in Bulgaria, showing fresh Neanderthal ancestry. These people lived 45,000 years ago, their bones revealing lives of hunting, tool-making, and enduring glacial winds. But the pain, short lifespans, around 30 years if lucky, with arthritis from constant labor and tooth wear from gnawing hides. The sarcasm-worthy part? We once thought sapiens conquered by superiority. Better brains, better tools, but DNA says nope, we needed their help. Neanderthal genes for vitamin D synthesis helped us in sun-scarce north, while others for fat metabolism kept us warm. Yet, some regions of our genome are Neanderthal deserts. No traces there, suggesting those genes were harmful and weeded out by natural selection. Like the one near FOXP2, the language gene. Maybe Neanderthal versions hindered communication, giving pure sapiens an edge in coordinating hunts or storytelling around the fire. Let's linger on the cultural clash. Neanderthals had their own vibe. Mousterian tools, simple but effective, and evidence of symbolic behavior like red ochre use. Sapiens brought Aurignacian flair, bone tools, jewelry, cave paintings. When they mixed, hybrids might have bridged worlds, teaching sapiens Neanderthal fire-starting tricks or learning sapiens long-distance throwing spears. But the absurdity. This exchange happened amid violence. Bones show cannibalism, head trauma, peaceful mixing, sometimes but often not. Survival meant taking what you could, including partners. And the kids, always the hybrids. A 90,000-year-old girl from Denisova Cave had a Neanderthal mom and Denisovan dad. Talk about diverse ancestry. Her existence proves species lines were blurry, but her life? Isolated in Siberian caves, facing -40 degrees, scavenging for berries and bison. Pain-defined existence. No medicine beyond herbs, no safety nets. If injured, you hobbled or died. As part 1 nears its end, reflect on how DNA rewrites history's narrative. No longer are Neanderthals the losers. They're our co-authors. Recent Rochester research reconstructs timelines showing interbreeding's evolutionary impacts, boosting fertility in some, but causing issues in others. The irony, modern tech reveals ancient intimacies, making us question our purity. In part 2, we'll unpack the health legacies, from allergies to addictions, and the dramatic fall of Neanderthals. What ancient gene do you blame for your quirks? Comment now. Hey guys, ready to dive back into the prehistoric soap opera where humans and Neanderthals got tangled in a genetic love-hate saga? Last time we uncovered the gritty truth of their mixing, awkward cave hookups, survival-driven alliances, and a world where love was less about roses and more about not freezing to death. Now, in part 2, we're zooming into the health legacies of these ancient flings, the dramatic downfall of Neanderthals, and the messy cultural mashups that shaped our ancestors. It's a tale of ironic triumphs, genetic curses, and the brutal pain of Ice Age life. What's the weirdest thing you've learned about your Neanderthal roots so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep this time travel party going. Picture the scene. It's 45,000 years ago, and the Eurasian landscape is a frozen wasteland dotted with caves, campfires, and the occasional mammoth carcass. Our Homo sapiens ancestors, still newbies in this icy hell, are rubbing shoulders, sometimes literally, with Neanderthals, those rugged locals who've been toughing it out for eons. DNA tells us their interbreeding wasn't a one-night stand but a millennia-long fling, leaving us with 1 to 2% Neanderthal genes that do more than just spice up our ancestry reports. These genes are like ancient souvenirs, some boosting our survival, others haunting us like a bad caveman breakup. The absurdity? We're walking proof of prehistoric passion, yet the same DNA that helped us conquer the Ice Age now makes us sneeze at pollen or crave a cigarette. Survival back then was a cruel joke, and we're still paying the price. Comment below. Ever blamed your allergies on a Neanderthal ancestor? Let's start with the health legacies, because nothing says, "Thanks, Neanderthals," like a genetic gift that's also a curse. Those ancient hookups gave us some serious evolutionary perks. Neanderthal genes for immune response, like those in the HLA region, helped our ancestors fend off Eurasian pathogens. Think viruses or bacteria that could have wiped out entire sapiens clans fresh from Africa's warm embrace. A 2023 study from Stanford mapped how these genes, particularly HLA-DRB1, supercharged our immune systems, letting us tackle diseases our African forebears never faced. Handy, right? But here's the ironic twist. Those same genes can overreact today, contributing to autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. Your body's fighting imaginary invaders thanks to a Neanderthal tweak that's out of place in our sanitized world. And it gets better. Genes linked to skin pigmentation, like MC1R, helped sapiens absorb more vitamin D in low sunlight Europe, great for avoiding rickets, but also makes some of us burn like lobster in the sun. Survival's price tag, a legacy of health quirks that make modern life a genetic minefield. Then there's the brain stuff, where the absurdity hits peak levels. Neanderthal DNA influences our noggins, literally. Genes like NOVA1, tied to neural development, carry Neanderthal variants that affect how our brains process stress or mood. A 2024 paper from the Max Planck Institute suggests these variants might have helped our ancestors stay alert in dangerous environments. Think spotting a cave lion before it spots you. But today, they're linked to higher risks of depression or even nicotine addiction. Imagine surviving saber-toothed tigers only to have your great-grandkids struggle with quitting vapes. Talk about a cosmic prank. And let's not forget sleep patterns. Neanderthal genes in the clock region make some of us night owls, a trait that was useful for guarding the cave but now just means scrolling X at 2 a.m. Drop a comment. Are you a night owl blaming your Neanderthal DNA or just bad at bedtime? Now let's talk about the Neanderthals' downfall, because their exit from the stage is a masterclass in historical tragedy. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals vanished, leaving behind bones, tools, and a genetic echo in us. Why? The theories are as varied as a prehistoric buffet. Climate change is a big one. Rapid warming and cooling cycles messed with their food supply as mammoths and reindeer dwindled. Neanderthals were meat-heavy hunters, relying on close-range kills that left them battered. Sapiens, meanwhile, had lighter spears and bows, letting them hunt from a safer distance. The pain? Neanderthal skeletons, like those from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, show healed fractures and arthritis. Imagine stabbing a woolly rhino with a flint spear, only to limp back to your cave with a broken rib. Survival was a grind, and Sapiens' tech gave them an edge. But it wasn't just tools. Sapiens had social skills Neanderthals couldn't match. Our ancestors formed larger groups. Think 50 to 100 people versus Neanderthal bands of 10 to 20. Bigger groups meant better resource sharing, more hands for childcare, and stronger defenses against rivals. DNA evidence from fossils like those in Romania's Oase Cave shows early sapiens with fresh Neanderthal ancestry, suggesting mixing happened just before Neanderthals started fading. The irony? Their genes helped us thrive, but our numbers likely overwhelmed them. Some researchers argue sapiens outcompeted Neanderthals for caves and hunting grounds, pushing them to marginal lands where starvation loomed. Others whispered darker tales. Violence. Skulls with blunt trauma, like one from France's La Chapelle aux Saints, hint at clashes. Did sapiens wipe them out? Maybe not directly, but crowding them out wasn't exactly friendly. Comment below. Do you think sapiens were bullies, or just better at the survival game? Let's dive into the cultural mashup, because when sapiens and Neanderthals mingled, it wasn't just genes swapping, it was ideas. Neanderthals had their Mousterian toolkit, chunky stone flakes for cutting, scraping, and stabbing. Sapiens brought the Aurignacian upgrade, finer blades, bone needles, even shell beads for bling. At sites like Grotte du Rhin in France, archaeologists found hybrid artifacts, Neanderthal-style tools mixed with sapiens' fancy ornaments. Did they trade? Copy each other? Or were hybrids the innovators, blending mom's sapiens flair with dad's Neanderthal grit? The absurdity: we once thought Neanderthals were too primitive for culture, but they were painting caves and burying their dead with flowers long before sapiens showed up. A 2024 study from the University of Tübingen even suggests Neanderthals used glue. Yes, glue, to haft tools, a crafty trick sapiens later adopted. The pain: despite their smarts, Neanderthals couldn't scale up their networks. Small, scattered groups meant less innovation, while sapiens' gossip and trade routes built a cultural juggernaut. Now imagine the hybrids, those kids caught between worlds. A 2023 analysis of a 41,000-year-old jawbone from Ranus, Germany, confirmed a human Neanderthal mix, with DNA showing recent interbreeding. These kids might have been stronger, thanks to Neanderthal muscle genes, but also faced social hurdles. Were they accepted? Shunned? In a sapiens camp, a kid with a heavy brow might have been the odd one out. In a Neanderthal group, a slender frame could have drawn stares. The nightmare: growing up in a world where different meant danger. Predators didn't care about your ancestry, but rival clans might. And childbirth? Brutal. Neanderthal pelvises were wider, but hybrid births could have been risky, with sapiens moms struggling with bigger-headed babies. Infant graves, like those at Lagarvelho in Portugal, show hybrid kids who didn't make it past childhood. Disease, malnutrition, or just bad luck. Let's zoom in on Zara again, our sapiens woman from part 1, now raising her hybrid son in a mixed camp. She's teaching him sapiens tricks, sewing hides with bone needles, while Gronk, his Neanderthal dad, shows him how to nap flint like a pro. The boy's got his dad's strength, but mom's knack for storytelling, maybe even carving little mammoth figures. But the pain: the camp's low on food, and rival sapiens groups eye their cave. Zara's band trades with Neanderthals for meat, but tensions flare. One wrong move, and it's spears, not hugs. Survival means navigating this cultural tightrope, where a misstep could mean exile, or worse. Zara's son, caught between worlds, might have been the future, but the present was a fight to eat, sleep, and not die. The genetic fallout keeps getting weirder. Neanderthal DNA affects our noses, literally. A 2024 UCL study found genes shaping nasal tissue, likely from Neanderthals, that helped our ancestors sniff out food or danger. Cool, but those same genes can mean chronic sinus issues today. And reproduction? Neanderthal variants in the progesterone receptor gene boosted fertility in ancient women. More babies, better survival, but now increased risks of miscarriage or preterm birth. The irony: what saved us then screws us now. And here's a kicker: Neanderthal genes might have made sapiens men less fertile. Some Y chromosome regions show no Neanderthal traces, suggesting hybrid males struggled to pass on genes. Nature's cruel edit. Sapiens women thrived with Neanderthal boosts, but some men paid a price. As we wrap part 2, the Neanderthal legacy feels like a bittersweet inheritance. Their genes armed us against the Ice Age, but left us with health quirks and a haunting question: did we absorb them or erase them? Next time, we'll explore the Denisovan twist, the global spread of these genes, and how hybrids shaped our world. What's the most surprising Neanderthal gift in your DNA? Drop it in the comments, and let's meet back for part 3's wild ride. Hey guys, ready to trek back into the prehistoric wilds where humans and Neanderthals tangled in a genetic dance of survival and absurdity? We've already uncovered the gritty hookups and health legacies that make your 2% Neanderthal DNA a mixed bag of blessings and curses. Now, in part 3, we're diving into the Denisovan twist, the global spread of these ancient genes, and how hybrid kids shaped a world where survival was a brutal gamble. It's a saga of icy caves, cross-species drama, and the ironic pain of outlasting your cousins while carrying their legacy in your blood. What's the wildest prehistoric fact you've stumbled across so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep this Ice Age roller coaster rolling. Imagine the scene. 43,000 years ago, the Eurasian tundra stretches endlessly, a frozen hellscape where blizzards howl and cave bears prowl. Our Homo sapiens ancestors are still the new kids on the block, learning to survive alongside Neanderthals. But now there's a third player in this prehistoric soap opera, the Denisovans. Known mostly from a pinky bone and a few teeth found in Siberia's Denisova cave, these mysterious cousins add a spicy twist to the interbreeding saga. DNA shows Denisovans mixed with both Neanderthals and sapiens, leaving their mark in modern populations, especially in Asia and Oceania, where some folks carry up to 6% Denisovan genes. The absurdity? We're all walking mosaics of ancient flings, pieced together from species that barely knew what a species was. The pain? Life back then was a meat grinder. Starvation, frostbite, and the constant threat of a mammoth tusk through the chest. Survival meant making tough calls, like cozying up to a Denisovan stranger for warmth or protection. Comment below. Would you rather bunk with a Neanderthal or a Denisovan for a winter night? Let's unpack the Denisovan drama, because it's a game changer. Unlike Neanderthals who ruled Europe, Denisovans roamed Asia, from Siberia's icy caves to the Tibetan Plateau's dizzying heights. A 2024 study from the University of Copenhagen pinpointed Denisovan genes for high-altitude adaptation, like EPAS-1, which helps modern Tibetans thrive at 14,000 feet where oxygen is scarcer than a good day in the Ice Age. These genes likely came from a Denisovan hookup 40,000 years ago, when sapiens wandered into Asia and found these stocky, cold-adapted locals. Picture Zara, our sapiens woman from earlier parts, trekking through the Himalayas with her band, desperate for shelter. They stumble into a Denisovan camp where a guy, let's call him Torg, with a jaw like a boulder and a knack for surviving blizzards, offers a deal: food for alliance. The result? A hybrid kid who can breathe easier at altitude, a trait that helped sapiens colonize Asia's highlands. But the pain: childbirth in a frozen cave, with no midwives, just prayers to spirits nobody's sure exist. Drop a comment. Ever been short of breath hiking? Thank a Denisovan, or curse them. The global spread of these genes is where things get wild. Neanderthal DNA dominates in Europeans and Asians, but Denisovan DNA pops up big in places like Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australia. A 2023 Nature paper mapped how sapiens carried Neanderthal and Denisovan genes across continents, creating a patchwork of ancestry. After interbreeding in Eurasia, sapiens migrated east, south, and even back to Africa, spreading hybrid genes like prehistoric gossip. Some of these genes were gold. Denisovan variants for fat metabolism helped Pacific Islanders survive long sea voyages with scarce food, while Neanderthal immune genes shielded against local bugs. But the irony? These same genes can misfire today. Denisovan DNA in the TLR1 gene boosts immunity but also ups the risk of allergies. Great for dodging ancient plagues, less great for sneezing through spring. And Neanderthal genes linked to blood clotting, useful for healing wounds from hunting mishaps, now raise stroke risks in our couch potato era. The nightmare. Our ancestors survived by borrowing DNA, but we're stuck with the fine print. Let's zoom into the hybrids, because these kids were the real MVPs of this genetic saga. Fossils like the 90,000-year-old Denisova 11 girl, half Neanderthal, half Denisovan, prove crossbreeding was no fluke. Found in Siberia, her bones scream diversity. Mom was Neanderthal, dad was Denisovan, and their kid lived in a cave where survival meant outsmarting wolves and starvation. Fast forward to 40,000 years ago, and sapiens Neanderthal hybrids were popping up across Europe, like the kid from Pestera cu Oase in Romania, whose DNA shows 6 to 9% Neanderthal ancestry, fresh from a great-grandparent's fling. These hybrids were the bridge between worlds, blending sapiens' social smarts with Neanderthal strength or Denisovan altitude hacks. But the pain. Growing up hybrid wasn't easy. Imagine a kid with a sapiens mom's slender frame and a Neanderthal dad's heavy brow trying to fit in with either group. Social stigma? Likely. Sapiens clans with their growing numbers might have shunned odd kids, while Neanderthal bands dwindling fast could have been just as cliquey. Survival meant proving your worth, hunting, crafting, or enduring the cold, while dodging spears from rivals who didn't like your face. The cultural mashup is where the absurdity shines. Sapiens brought their Oranyushian swagger. Think cave art, bone flutes, and shell necklaces. Neanderthals had their Mousterian grit, with sturdy tools and ritual burials. Denisovans? We're still piecing it together, but finds like a 50,000-year-old deer bone pendant from Denisova Cave suggest they had style too. When these groups met, it was a prehistoric cultural exchange, like a Stone Age flea market. A 2024 study from the University of Bordeaux found hybrid sites, like Bacho Kiro Cave, where sapiens tools mixed with Neanderthal-style scrapers. Did hybrids innovate? Probably. A kid with a sapiens mom's knack for sewing and a Denisovan dad's high-altitude tricks might have crafted better hides for mountain treks. But the nightmare? Learning meant trial and error in a world where errors killed. Burn the fire too low? Freeze. Misjudge a spear throw? Starve. The irony, we owe our cultural leap to these exchanges, Yet the players, Neanderthals, Denisovans, got erased. Let's revisit Zara and her hybrid son, now a teen in a mixed camp somewhere in the Caucasus. He's got his dad Gronk's brawn, but Zara's gift for storytelling, maybe chanting tales of mammoth hunts to keep the clan's spirits up. The camp's a melting pot, sapiens with bone needles, Neanderthals with flint knives, even a Denisovan trader swapping highland herbs. They're sharing tricks. Gronk teaches sapiens to glue tools. Yep, Neanderthals did that, while Zara shows Denisovans how to weave nets. But the pain, rival clans lurk, eyeing their cave. A bad hunt means hunger, and a sick kid might not survive the night. No herbs can fix a fever when you're out of firewood. Survival's a team effort, but trust is scarce. Zara's son, caught between worlds, feels the stairs but proves his worth with a spear throw that downs a deer. The irony? His mixed blood makes him vital, but he's still an outsider. Now, the global genetic spread gets messier. Sapiens didn't just stay put. They wandered, carrying Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA to every corner. A 2024 Cell study traced how these genes flowed into Africa, where sapiens returned around 20,000 years ago, bringing Neanderthal traces to populations once thought pure. The absurdity: nobody's pure. Folks, we're all hybrids of a prehistoric, free-for-all. But some genes didn't stick. Regions like the olfactory receptor genes show Neanderthal traces, but others, like those tied to speech, are sapiens only, suggesting hybrids with off traits didn't pass them on. Nature's brutal editor. If your genes didn't help, you didn't last. The pain. Entire lineages vanished, hybrid or not, as sapiens numbers grew while others dwindled. The Denisovan angle adds spice. Their genes for skin and hair, found in modern Asians, helped sapiens blend into diverse climates, from jungles to mountains. But the nightmare: those climates were death traps, malaria, altitude sickness, or just plain starvation. A 2023 PNAS paper found Denisovan genes for lipid metabolism in Inuit populations, perfect for surviving Arctic diets of seal blubber. Cool, but those same genes can mess with cholesterol today. The irony: we're built for a world that doesn't exist anymore, lugging ancient DNA like outdated software. As we wrap part 3, the hybrid story feels like a tragic epic. Neanderthals and Denisovans gave us the tools to conquer the globe, but their cultures and bodies faded, leaving only genetic whispers. Next time, we'll close with the final pieces: how these genes shape us today, why Neanderthals and Denisovans vanished, and what it all means for our human story. What's the most surprising thing about our hybrid past? Comment below, and let's brace for part 4's final dive. Hey guys, ready for the final trek into the prehistoric soap opera, where humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans tangled in a genetic free-for-all. We've unraveled the gritty hookups, health legacies, and the Denisovan twist that made us the hybrid weirdos we are today. Now, in part 4, we're tying up the loose ends: how these ancient genes shape our modern lives, why Neanderthals and Denisovans vanished, and what this whole saga means for our human story. It's a wild ride of irony, pain, and the absurd reality that our survival hinged on prehistoric flings and freezing caves. What's the craziest thing you've learned about our caveman cousins? Drop it in the comments, and let's close out this Ice Age epic. Picture the world 40,000 years ago, a brutal tundra where survival meant outsmarting wolves, starvation, and your own bad decisions. Our Homo sapiens ancestors, fresh from Africa, were mixing it up with Neanderthals and Denisovans, creating hybrid kids who carried the torch for humanity's spread across the globe. Fast forward to today, and those ancient trysts live on in our DNA. 1 to 2% Neanderthal for most non-Africans, up to 6% Denisovan in some Asian and Oceanic populations. But these genes aren't just cool trivia for your ancestry report. They're shaping your health, your looks, and even your late-night snack cravings. The irony? We owe our modern existence to these extinct cousins, yet we've spent centuries painting them as dumb brutes while they literally helped us survive. The pain? Their world was a nightmare of broken bones, early deaths, and constant hunger, and we're still grappling with the genetic baggage they left behind. Comment below. Ever wonder which part of you, your nose, your allergies, your insomnia, is a gift from a Neanderthal or Denisovan? Let's dive into how these genes mess with us today, because the legacy of those cave hookups is a masterclass in cosmic irony. Neanderthal DNA, for instance, tweaks our immune system, great for fighting off Ice Age bugs, but now it can make your body overreact, triggering things like Crohn's disease or type 1 diabetes. A 2024 study from Harvard found Neanderthal variants in the IL-6 gene, which ramps up inflammation to battle infections, but also ups your risk for heart disease in our burger and Netflix era. Denisovan genes? They're no angels either. That EPAS1 gene, a lifesaver for Tibetans at high altitudes, can cause blood pressure issues in lowlanders. And let's talk about your skin. Neanderthal. C1R variants gave our ancestors pale skin to soak up vitamin D in gloomy Europe, but today they mean you might fry at the beach. Oh, and if you're prone to binge eating or struggling to quit smoking, blame Neanderthal tweaks in dopamine pathways. Genes like DRD2 that made our ancestors hyper-alert for predators now make you reach for that extra donut. Survival back then meant staying sharp. Now it's a recipe for modern vices. Drop a comment. Which Neanderthal quirk do you see in yourself? Sunburns, stress eating, or something else? Now, let's tackle the big question. Why did Neanderthals and Denisovans vanish? Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals faded from the fossil record, and Denisovans followed soon after, leaving only scraps of bone and DNA. The theories are a prehistoric whodunit. Climate change played a starring role. Rapid warming around 45,000 years ago, known as the Lachamp event, messed with ecosystems, shrinking the herds of mammoths and reindeer Neanderthals depended on. Their hunting style, up close and personal with spears, was a brutal grind. Skeletons from sites like Krapina in Croatia show smashed bones and early arthritis from wrestling megafauna. Sapiens, with their long-range bows and nets, could hunt safer and smarter. The pain. Neanderthals were built for endurance, but endurance doesn't help when the game's gone. Denisovans faced similar woes in Asia, where forests turned to grasslands, disrupting their food chain. Survival was a losing bet when the world itself turned against you. But it wasn't just nature. Sapiens had a social edge that was downright unfair. Our ancestors rolled in groups of 50 to 150, sharing resources, swapping stories, and building trade networks that stretched hundreds of miles. Think prehistoric Amazon, minus the drones. Neanderthals and Denisovans, stuck in small bands of 10 to 20, isolated and inbreeding, their gene pools stagnating. A 2024 Nature study analyzed Neanderthal DNA from Chagirskaya cave in Siberia, showing low genetic diversity. Basically, they were marrying their cousins, which didn't help their odds. Sapiens with bigger groups could afford to lose a few to disease or bad hunts. The irony, we absorbed their genes through interbreeding, then outcompeted them with sheer numbers. Some say violence sealed the deal. Skulls with bashed-in crania, like one from Saint-Césaire in France, hint at Sapiens-Neanderthal clashes. Did we wipe them out? Probably not genocide, but crowding them into barren lands wasn't exactly neighborly. Comment below. Were Sapiens just better at the game? Or were we the ultimate prehistoric bullies? The Denisovan disappearance is murkier, since we've got so little to go on, just a few bones and teeth. But their DNA suggests they were spread thin across Asia, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. When Sapiens arrived, they brought better tools and bigger groups, likely pushing Denisovans to marginal habitats. A 2023 PNAS paper suggests Denisovans survived longer in remote areas, like the Tibetan Plateau, but eventually couldn't keep up. Their genes live on in us, especially in Pacific Islanders, where variants for fat storage helped survive lean times but now contribute to obesity risks. The nightmare? These cousins gave us survival hacks, only to fade into oblivion as Sapiens steamrolled the globe. Let's zoom back to Zara, our Sapiens woman, and her hybrid son, now a young man in a mixed camp. He's a walking testament to this saga. Neanderthal strength, Denisovan stamina, Sapiens smarts. He hunts with a bow, learned from Sapiens kin, but uses Neanderthal glue to haft his spears. His camp's a cultural blender. Cave art from Sapiens, burial rituals from Neanderthals, maybe a Denisovan pendant dangling from his neck. But the pain, his world's collapsing. Neanderthal bands are thinning, Denisovan traders stop coming, and Sapiens groups grow bolder, claiming the best caves. Zara's son might lead a hunt, but he feels the whispers. Too different for some, too vital to lose for others. Survival means proving himself daily, whether dodging a rival's spear or outrunning a storm. The irony, his hybrid vigor helped Sapiens thrive, but his parents' people are ghosts, their cultures buried under Sapiens' march. What does this all mean for us? The human story is a messy tapestry, woven from the DNA of extinct cousins we once dismissed as lesser. Neanderthals gave us immune boosts, Denisovans gave us altitude hacks, but both paid the ultimate price: extinction. A 2024 Cell study shows how their genes shaped our migration, letting sapiens conquer every corner from Arctic ice to tropical jungles. But the absurdity: we're still paying for it. Neanderthal DNA in the OCA2 gene gives some of us blue eyes. Pretty, but also prone to UV damage. Denisovan tweaks in lipid genes helped ancestors survive starvation but now clog our arteries. We're built for a world of mammoths and blizzards, not office jobs and fast food. The pain, our ancestors' survival came at a cost, and we're still settling the bill. As we close this saga, reflect on the bigger picture. Neanderthals and Denisovans weren't just footnotes, they were co-authors of humanity. Their tools, their genes, their sacrifices let us paint caves, build cities, and eventually sequence their DNA to tell this story. The irony? We glorify our sapiens smarts but owe our survival to the cousins we outlasted. Their extinction wasn't a victory, it was a loss, a fading of cultures and lives that shaped us. So, next time you sneeze, stay up too late, or burn at the beach, tip your hat to those ancient flings in smoky caves. They made us, flaws and all. That's the end of our prehistoric dive. From tundra hookups to global migrations, we've seen how Neanderthals and Denisovans live on in us, despite a world that tried to crush them. What's your biggest takeaway from this genetic epic? Drop it in the comments. Where are you watching from and what time is it? Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. Until next time, keep digging into the past, because it's never as simple as the history books claim. Imagine this: a queen so obsessed with her dead husband that she hauls his coffin across Spain like it's her most prized luggage, opening it at night to kiss his decaying face, while her own father whispers she's mad and locks her away for 46 years. Sounds like a gothic horror novel? Nope. That's the real, absurd life of Joanna of Castile, better known as Juana la Loca, the mad queen whose story is a sarcastic slap in the face of royal fairy tales. Buckle up, because if you think modern politics is cutthroat, wait till you see how survival in the 15th century Spanish court meant dodging daggers from your own family. This isn't just history, it's a nightmare wrapped in a crown. The Golden Age of Spain, or so they call it. The late 1400s, when Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, those power couple extraordinaire, were busy uniting kingdoms, kicking out Muslims and Jews in the name of purity, and funding Columbus's wild goose chase across the ocean. Into this whirlwind of conquest and hypocrisy pops our heroine, Joanna, born on November 6th, 1479, in Toledo. Not the Ohio one, the Spanish heartland, where the air smelled of incense, intrigue, and impending doom. She was the third daughter, fourth child overall, sandwiched between siblings who were supposed to inherit everything. Little did anyone know, fate had a twisted sense of humor, and Joanna would end up queen of it all, only to have it yanked away in the most humiliating way possible. Picture young Joanna, a fair-skinned girl with strawberry blonde hair and brown eyes that probably sparkled with innocence before the world crushed it out of her. Her parents, Isabella and Ferdinand, the Catholic monarchs, as they pompously styled themselves, weren't exactly hands-on parents. Mom was off conquering Granada, Dad was scheming in Aragon, and the kids shuffled around like chess pieces on a board soaked in blood and ambition. Survival in this era meant being born royal was both a blessing and a curse. You got silk gowns and Latin lessons, but also the constant threat of poison, plague, or a convenient accident if you stood in someone's way. Joanna's education was a masterclass in absurdity, tutors drilling her in canon law, philosophy, heraldry, and needlework, as if stitching a tapestry would prepare her for the backstabbing ahead. She learned French, Latin, even how to hunt and hawk, like a proper lady warrior who could recite Seneca while gutting a deer. But let's be real, in a time when women were pawns in the great game of dynasties, Joanna's smarts were just window dressing. Her mom, Isabella, that fierce queen who rode into battle pregnant, made sure her daughters were educated enough to snag powerful husbands, but not so much they'd get ideas above their station. The pain of it all? Girls like Joanna grew up knowing their worth was measured in alliances and heirs. No room for dreams or dalliances, just duty, deliveries, and dodging dysentery from the filthy water everyone drank. If you think period cramps are bad now, imagine them in a drafty castle with no ibuprofen, while your parents plot your marriage to some foreign duke you've never met. Would you trade places with a Renaissance princess? Comment below if you'd last a week without Wi-Fi or antibiotics. Bonus points for your survival strategy. Joanna's siblings set the stage for the tragic comedy to come. there was her older brother, John, the golden boy heir, destined for glory. Then Isabella, the eldest sister, married off to Portugal like a diplomatic gift basket. Maria would follow suit, and little Catherine, Catherine of Aragon, future wife of Henry VIII and queen of marital misery. But Joanna, she was the spare to the spare, not expected to rule. That changed faster than a Spanish Inquisition verdict. In 1497, Brother John drops dead at 19. Rumors of overexertion in the bedroom with his wife because even royals couldn't escape the absurdity of dying from too much honeymoon. Then, his pregnant widow miscarries. Next, Sister Isabella, now Queen of Portugal, dies in childbirth in 1498, and her baby boy Miguel kicks the bucket in 1500 at age 2. Boom, Joanna's suddenly the heir presumptive to Castile and Aragon. Talk about a family curse. It's like the universe decided to play royal dominoes, and Joanna was the last one standing. The irony? Just as she's thrust into the spotlight, her parents are already eyeing her like a potential problem. Isabella, that devout Catholic who burned heretics for fun, worried about Joanna's melancholy tendencies. Was it depression, grief over lost siblings, or just the soul-crushing weight of expectations in a world where queens were breeders, not leaders? Survival meant plastering on a smile while your insides twisted. Joanna's betrothal in 1496 to Philip of Austria, Philip the Handsome, as history mockingly calls him, was supposed to seal alliances against France. At 16, she's shipped off to Flanders, that foggy low-country hellhole, far from sunny Spain. The wedding? A proxy affair first, then the real deal in Lier on October 20th, 1496. Philip, 18, tall, blonde, and apparently drop-dead gorgeous, but with the personality of a scheming peacock. Their marriage starts hot, literally. Legend has it they couldn't wait for the ceremony. Philip dragged her to bed before the priest finished mumbling. 6 kids in 9 years. Eleanor in 1498, Charles, future Holy Roman Emperor, in 1500, Isabella in 1501, Ferdinand in 1503, Mary in 1505, and Catherine in 1507. Popping out heirs like a human vending machine, all while dealing with Philip's wandering eye. The absurdity. Here's Joanna, fluent in 6 languages, raised on philosophy, reduced to a jealous wife chasing her philandering hubby around court. Reports of her fits, throwing tantrums, slashing portraits of his mistresses. Was it madness, or just a woman pushed to the brink in an era when husbands could cheat openly, but wives had to grin and bear it? The pain of survival for royal women. Endure infidelity, miscarriages, and the constant fear your kids might die young, all while smiling for the courtiers. Philip's Flanders court was a den of debauchery compared to strict Spanish piety. Joanna, raised Catholic to the core, clashed with the loose morals. She fired Flemish ladies-in-waiting for being too flirty, earning enemies who whispered she was unstable. Ferdinand, back home, smelled opportunity. As Joanna became heir, he schemed to control her. In 1502, the Cortes of Toro swears her in as Princess of Asturias, but with Philip as consort, because God forbid a woman rule alone. They travel to Spain for the oath, but Joanna's pregnant and homesick for Flanders? No, it's more like she's torn between loyalties. The trip back, stormy seas, shipwrecks, literal metaphors for her life. Then, boom. Isabella dies November 26th, 1504. Joanna's Queen of Castile at 25. But Ferdinand, he proclaims himself regent, citing her illness. The Cortes buys it, minting coins with both names but keeping power in his hands. Philip, not one to miss out, sails to claim his share, but winds up shipwrecked in England, hosted by Henry VII. More absurdity. While Joanna waits in Flanders, Philip's charming the Tudors, signing treaties that screw Spain. They finally land in Castile April 1506, and the power struggle erupts. Nobles flock to Philip, tired of Ferdinand's grip. The two men meet at Villafafila, sign a treaty declaring Joanna unfit due to infirmities and passions. Ferdinand pretends to agree, then renounces it. Sneaky bastard. Philip crowns himself King Jure Uxoris, by right of his wife, but it's short-lived. September 25th, 1506. He dies in Burgos at 28. Typhoid, poisoned by Ferdinand. The rumors fly. Joanna, 6 months pregnant with Catherine, is devastated. Here's where the Loca legend explodes. She refuses to bury him, insisting on traveling with the coffin to Granada, as per Isabella's will. For months, the procession winds through Spain. By night, Because a widow doesn't show herself in daylight. She opens the coffin repeatedly, kissing his feet, checking for life, jealous even of female mourners. Was it madness, grief-stricken love, or political theater to protect her rights? Modern shrinks say maybe bipolar or schizophrenia, but historians argue it was exaggerated by men who wanted her sidelined. The pain, widowed at 26 with 5 kids and 1 on the way, in a foreign-feeling land, your dad circling like a vulture. Joanna tries to rule from Torquemada in December 1506, signing decrees, but chaos reigns, plague, famine, noble revolts. Ferdinand swoops in July 1507, convinces her to yield. By February 1509, she's confined to Tordesillas Palace, a palace that's basically a prison. Servants dismissed, loyalists replaced with spies. Ferdinand rules in her name till his death in 1516. Then son Charles, just 16, takes over, keeping mom locked up. Why? Power. Castile and Aragon are prizes too big to let a mad woman hold. Engage with me. Was Joanna truly Loca, or just Loca for love in a loveless world? Comment if you think her coffin road trip was romantic or ridiculous, and would you do the same for your soulmate? Or was it all a setup by greedy men? But this is just the setup. Joanna's imprisonment stretches 46 years, a lifetime of isolation, watching her empire grow from a window while her son becomes Charles V, ruler of half the world. The revolt of the Comuneros in 1520. Rebels free her briefly, beg her to lead against Charles's foreign ways. She listens, debates, then refuses, showing lucidity that undercuts the mad label. Ironic, right? The crazy queen saves her son's throne. The absurdity piles on. While locked away, Joanna's kids marry into every European court. Eleanor to Portugal and France, Charles to Isabella of Portugal, and so on. She's grandma to emperors but can't hug them. Survival? A slow rot in solitude, with occasional treatments, like being force-fed or tied down. Reports of her screaming at ghosts, refusing baths, depression, or defiance. Ferdinand dies 1516, leaving Aragon to Joanna nominally, but Charles co-rules. He visits rarely, more to legitimize his power than out of love. The pain of motherhood and royalty. Bear heirs, then watch them imprison you. As Part 1 ends, Joanna's just beginning her long night in Tordesillas. Stay for Part 2, where the madness myth deepens, rebellions rage, and her unstable reign becomes a punchline for history's cruel joke. Would you rebel for Juana? Comment your take. Welcome back, you intrepid time travelers, to the second act of our twisted tale about Joanna of Castile, the so-called Juana la Loca, whose life makes a telenovela look like a nap in the park. If you thought Part 1 was a wild ride, dead siblings, a philandering husband, a coffin road trip, and a father who'd sell his own daughter for a crown, brace yourself. The absurdity only escalates as Joanna's locked away in Tordesillas, labeled mad by the men who stole her throne. Picture this: a queen, once heir to Spain's golden age, now a prisoner in her own palace, watching her empire soar while she's fed lies and stale bread. This isn't just history, it's a sarcastic middle finger to the fairy tale myth of royalty. Let's dive into the nightmare of survival in the 16th century Spanish court, where loyalty was as rare as a clean bath. We left Joanna in 1509, barely 30, confined to Tordesillas, a palace that's more dungeon than royal retreat. Her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, that scheming fox, has declared her unfit to rule, citing her infirmities and passions after her husband Philip the Handsome's sudden death in 1506. Was she mad? Or just mad with grief, hauling his coffin across Castile in a bizarre mix of love, duty, and defiance? The truth's murkier than a Roman bath, but one thing's clear. Ferdinand saw a chance to keep Castile's crown, and he took it. Joanna's now queen in name only, locked away with her infant daughter Catherine, while her dad rules as regent. The pain of survival? Imagine being a mother of 6, widowed, betrayed, and caged, your kids raised by strangers while you're branded a lunatic. If that doesn't scream historical absurdity, nothing does. Let's set the scene. Tordesillas, a sleepy town on the Duero River, is no Versailles. Joanna's palace is a fortified house, windows barred, guarded by men loyal to Ferdinand. Her staff, hand-picked spies, reporting every word, every tear. Her days are a monotonous hell. Prayers, embroidery, maybe a lute if she's lucky. No court, no banquets, just the slow drip of isolation. The irony? She's Queen of Castile, a land bursting with wealth from the New World, gold from Mexico, silver from Peru. Yet she's got less freedom than a peasant. Columbus's voyages, funded by her mom Isabella, are making Spain a superpower. But Joanna? She's a footnote, her crown a prop for her father's ambition. The absurdity kicks into high gear with Ferdinand's propaganda campaign. He spreads tales of Joanna's madness to justify her imprisonment. She refused to eat? Proof she's unhinged. She clung to Philip's corpse? Clearly insane. Never mind that she was pregnant, grieving, and surrounded by vipers who wanted her throne. Contemporary chroniclers like Peter Martir d'Anghiera describe her as melancholic, but even he admits she spoke lucidly when pressed. The pain of survival in this era meant women, especially queens, were only as powerful as the men around them allowed. Joanna's madness was convenient, a catch-all excuse to sideline her. If she'd been a man, her outburst might have been called passion. Instead, she's Juana la Loca, a cautionary tale for uppity women. But the plot thickens in 1516, when Ferdinand dies. Joanna, now 36, inherits Aragon too, making her queen of a united Spain. Castile, Aragon, Navarre, even bits of Italy. She's one of the most powerful women in Europe, at least on paper. In reality, still locked up. Her 16-year-old son, Charles, steps up as Charles I of Spain, later Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Does he free his mom? Nope. He visits Tordesillas, swears loyalty, then keeps her confined, ruling in her name. The sarcasm drips. What a filial son, ensuring mom's safety while pocketing her empire. Charles, raised in Flanders with Philip's family, barely knows Joanna. He's a Habsburg through and through, more loyal to his dad's legacy than his imprisoned mother. Let's pause for a reality check. Imagine you're Joanna, watching your teenage son, whom you birthed in a Flemish castle after fighting off your husband's mistresses, sail in from abroad to claim your crown. You're still sharp, signing decrees when they let you, but every move's watched. Your daughter, Catherine, barely 9, is your only companion, but even she's taken away in 1518 to marry off later. The pain? Heart-wrenching. You're a mother, a queen, yet powerless. Survival means swallowing your pride, knowing your kids are pawns in a game you can't play. Would you keep fighting, or just give up? Drop a comment with your take. Could you endure Joanna's isolation, or would you be plotting a jailbreak? Now, enter the revolt of the Comuneros, the juiciest twist yet. By 1520, Castile's boiling over. Nobles and commoners alike are fed up with Charles's foreign ways, his Flemish advisors, his taxes to fund wars in Germany, his neglect of Spanish traditions. They see Joanna as their trump card, a queen born and bred in Castile who could rally the people. In September 1520, rebels led by Juan de Padilla storm Tordesillas, free Joanna, and beg her to lead. Picture it: a 40-year-old queen, locked away for a decade, suddenly handed a chance to reclaim her throne. The absurdity? She listens, debates, even meets with rebel leaders like Antonio de Acuña, Bishop of Zamora. She signs a few papers showing she's not the drooling madwoman her son claims, but then she refuses to fully join them. Why? Historians still argue. Some say it was loyalty to Charles, her son and heir. Others say she feared a trap, knowing rebels might use her as a figurehead then ditch her. Or maybe she was just broken, a decade of confinement sapping her will. The irony is brutal. The mad queen proves her sanity by rejecting a revolution that could have freed her, saving Charles's throne in the process. By 1521, the Comuneros are crushed at Villalar, their leaders beheaded. Charles tightens the screws on Joanna, moving her to harsher quarters in Tordesillas. Her rescue becomes her prison's upgrade. More guards, fewer visitors. The pain of survival. Even your rebellion betrays you. Let's dig into the madness myth. Was Joanna truly Loca? Her behavior, clinging to Philip's coffin, fasting, refusing baths, looks unhinged, but context matters. In 1506, widowed at 26, she was protecting her rights as queen, ensuring Philip's body reached Granada as her mom's will demanded. Her jealousy over his affairs? Less madness, more a woman asserting herself in a world where men held all the cards. Her confinement? Modern psychologists suggest depression or bipolar disorder, exacerbated by grief and isolation. But chroniclers like Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo, who served Charles, had every reason to exaggerate her instability. A sane queen threatens the men in charge. A mad one's easier to lock away. The sarcasm, call a woman crazy, and you don't have to listen to her. The absurdity deepens with Charles's reign. While Joanna's caged, He's building an empire stretching from Spain to the Americas to Germany. Her kids? Marrying into every royal house in Europe. Eleanor weds the King of Portugal, then France. Isabella marries Denmark's king. Ferdinand becomes Holy Roman Emperor after Charles. Mary weds Hungary's king. Catherine, poor Catherine, ends up in Portugal too. Joanna's the mother of dynasties, yet she's a ghost in her own story, her name on coins but her voice silenced. The pain, knowing your blood shapes the world while you rot in a room with one window? Engage with me. Was Joanna's refusal to lead the Comuneros brave or broken? Comment if you think she was playing 4D chess or just too tired to fight. And if you were her, would you have joined the rebels or stayed loyal to your son? Share your wildest royal survival plan. The social dynamics add another layer of nightmare. Tordesillas wasn't just a prison, it was a stage. Charles's advisors, like the Marquis of Denaya, Joanna's jailer, controlled her diet, her visitors, even her clothes. Reports of her refusing food or wearing rags? Maybe defiance, not madness. She'd argue theology with priests, proving her mind was sharp, but they'd twist it as heresy. Women in her position, think Catherine of Aragon, divorced by Henry VIII, faced similar gaslighting. The 16th century wasn't kind to queens who didn't play along. Survival meant enduring lies about your sanity, while your own kids profited from your cage. Let's revisit Part 1's horrors. Philip's death in 1506 wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. His sudden fever, or poison if you believe the gossip, left Joanna vulnerable. Ferdinand's quick move to declare her unfit smells like a power grab. The coffin journey. Less crazy, more a desperate act to assert her queenship in a world that didn't trust a woman to rule. The Spanish nobility, split between Ferdinand's old guard and Philip's Flemish clique, used her as a pawn. The pain of being a queen. Everyone wants your crown, but no one wants you. As Part 2 closes, Joanna's story is a bitter cocktail of betrayal and resilience. She's 40, still queen, but her world's shrinking. The Comuneros' failure marks the end of her last real shot at freedom. Charles, now a global powerhouse, keeps her locked away, his legitimacy tied to her name, but not her person. Part 3 will dive into her final decades, 46 years in Tordesillas, watching her empire grow while her mind and body fray. Will you stick around for the grim finale? Comment your thoughts. Is Joanna a tragic hero or a cautionary tale? And what's the worst betrayal you've heard of, royal or not? Let's keep this historical horror show rolling. Welcome back, you fearless history buffs, to the third chapter of our grim saga about Joanna of Castile, the so-called Juana la Loca, whose life is a masterclass in royal betrayal and historical absurdity. If you've stuck with us through the coffin-dragging, throne-stealing, and rebel-crushing chaos of parts 1 and 2, you're either hooked or just love watching train wrecks in slow motion. Picture this. A queen, once destined to rule a united Spain, now a ghost in her own story, locked away in Tordesillas while her son Charles V builds an empire on her name. The irony is thicker than the castle walls keeping her prisoner. This is no fairy tale. It's a sarcastic, gut-punching dive into the nightmare of survival in the 16th century, where loyalty was a myth and crowns came with chains. Ready for part 3? Let's wade deeper into this royal cesspool. We left Joanna in 1521, age 41, after the revolt of the Comuneros crashed and burned. The rebels freed her briefly, hoping she'd lead a Castilian uprising against her son Charles's foreign-flavored rule. She listened, debated, even signed a few papers, showing a flicker of the queen she could have been, but refused to fully join them. Was it loyalty to her son, fear of being used, or just exhaustion after a decade of confinement? Whatever the reason, her choice saved Charles's throne but tightened her own shackles. The Comuneros were slaughtered at Villalar, their leaders' heads on pikes, and Joanna, back to her palace prison in Tordesillas, now under stricter watch. The pain of survival? Knowing your one shot at freedom just made your cage smaller. Let's paint the scene. Tordesillas, 1520s. Joanna's world is a single room, maybe two if her jailers are feeling generous. Barred windows let in slivers of light, but the air's heavy with damp stone and despair. Her only company, a rotating cast of spies posing as servants, plus the occasional priest sent to save her soul. Her daughter Catherine, taken away in 1518 at age 11, is now a memory, married off to Portugal's king in 1525. Joanna's other kids, Charles, Eleanor, Isabella, Ferdinand, Mary, are scattered across Europe, marrying royalty and forging dynasties, but they rarely visit. Why would they? Mom's the mad queen, a liability better left locked up. The sarcasm drips. What a family reunion, where your kids rule the world but can't be bothered to send a letter. Joanna's daily life is a study in monotony and manipulation. The Marquis of Denia, her chief jailer, controls everything. Her food, often meager. Her clothes, sometimes rags. Her visitors, almost none. Reports from the time, like those from Denia himself, paint her as erratic, refusing meals, sleeping on the floor, arguing with priests about theology. Madness or defiance? In an era when women's emotions were weaponized against them, Joanna's every move is twisted to fit the Loca narrative. If she fasts, she's unhinged. If she debates scripture, she's heretical. If she demands news of her children, she's obsessive. The absurdity. A queen fluent in Latin, raised to rule, reduced to a case study in male paranoia. Survival meant enduring gaslighting so blatant, it'd make a modern therapist scream. Let's zoom out to the bigger picture. While Joanna's trapped, Charles V is rewriting history. By the 1520s, he's Holy Roman Emperor, ruling Spain, the Netherlands, chunks of Italy, and the New World. Gold and silver pour in from Mexico and Peru, conquered by Cortés and Pizarro. Spain's the superpower, its ships dominating oceans, its armies crushing foes. And Joanna? Her name's on the decrees. Her title, Queen of Castile and Aragon, stamps every coin. Yet she's a prisoner, her legitimacy propping up her son's rule. The irony is brutal. She's the linchpin of an empire, but can't even choose her own dinner. Charles visits sporadically, 1525, 1535, 1539, each time swearing devotion, then leaving her behind. The pain? Knowing your son's success depends on your erasure. Now let's dive into the madness myth, because it's the rotten core of this story. Was Joanna truly Loca? Part 1 showed her grief over Philip's death in 1506, hauling his coffin, kissing his feet, labeled as insanity by men like her father Ferdinand and husband's allies. Part 2 added the Comuneros episode, where her lucidity shone through, yet was ignored. By the 1520s, chroniclers like Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo, loyal to Charles, double down on the mad queen tale. They describe her refusing baths, wearing tattered clothes, talking to herself, but context is everything. Isolation breeds despair. A decade in a cell would make anyone look off. Modern historians like Bethany Aram argue she showed signs of depression or possibly bipolar disorder, worsened by trauma, widowhood, betrayal, confinement. Others, like Gillian Fleming, suggest her madness was exaggerated to justify her imprisonment. A sane queen could demand her throne, a mad one's easier to ignore. The sarcasm stings. Call a woman crazy, and you don't have to answer to her. Joanna's outbursts, shouting at guards, refusing food, read like protests, not lunacy. She'd argue with priests about Catholic doctrine, citing scripture like the scholar she was. Her mother, Isabella, burned heretics for less, yet Joanna's labeled unstable for questioning authority. The pain of survival in a patriarchal world. Your intellect's a threat, your emotions a crime. If Joanna had been a king, her defiance might have been epic poetry. Instead, she's a footnote, her story twisted by men who profited from her silence. Engage with me. Do you think Joanna's madness was real, or just a convenient lie? Comment if you see her as a rebel or a victim, or both. And if you were stuck in Tordesillas for a decade, how'd you keep your sanity? Share your survival tactics. I'm betting on smuggling a loot or bribing a guard. The absurdity piles on with the treatment she endured. Her jailers, under Denia's orders, tried to cure her with methods that sound like torture. Forced feedings, tying her to a chair, even beatings, disguised as care. Medical texts from the time, like those by Spanish physician Juan Luis Vives, recommended harsh discipline for melancholia. No therapy, no compassion, just punishment for not being the docile queen they wanted. The irony. Charles, who claimed to love his mother, approved this. He'd write letters calling her most serene, then let Denia starve her into submission. Survival meant enduring abuse while the world called it medicine. Let's connect this to Part 2's Comuneros Revolt. Joanna's refusal to lead wasn't just a missed chance, it was a glimpse of her political savvy. She met rebel leaders, heard their pleas, and signed documents, proof she wasn't a gibbering wreck. But joining them risked civil war, or worse, being a puppet for nobles who ditch her once they won. Her choice to stay neutral saved Charles's crown but cost her any hope of freedom. The pain. Knowing your sacrifice props up the son who betrays you. By the 1530s, Charles is too busy fighting Turks and Protestants to care about mom's plight. He's got Lutherans to crush, an empire to run, and a pope to impress. The social dynamics add another layer of horror. Tordesillas wasn't just a prison, it was a propaganda tool. Charles's court spread stories of Joanna's madness to keep Castile's nobles in line. Support the queen? She's crazy. Meanwhile, her kids are marrying Europe's elite. Eleanor to Francis I, Isabella to Denmark's Christian II, Mary to Hungary's Louis II, Ferdinand to Bohemia's Anna. Joanna's bloodline shapes the Habsburg dynasty, yet she's cut off from it. Her grandchildren, like Philip II, will rule Spain's golden age, but she'll never meet them. The pain of motherhood. Your children are your legacy, but also your jailers. Let's revisit Part 1's coffin journey to see how it haunts her now. In 1506, Joanna's trek with Philip's body wasn't just grief. It was a power move, asserting her right to rule Castile. By the 1520s, that act's been twisted into proof of her insanity. Chroniclers like Pedro Mexia amplify the tale, claiming she slept beside the coffin, kissed its contents daily. Exaggeration? Probably, but it stuck, painting her as a Gothic caricature. The sarcasm, a woman's love becomes her prison sentence. Ferdinand's propaganda, continued by Charles, ensures no one questions her confinement. The pain, knowing your story's been hijacked by the men you trusted. The 1530s bring more indignity. Joanna's health declines. Decades of poor diet, no exercise, and psychological torment take their toll. She's in her 50s, her red hair graying, her body frail, yet she still argues with her keepers, demanding news of her empire. When Charles visits in 1535, she reportedly pleads for freedom. He listens, nods, leaves. The absurdity: a queen whose name funds wars and colonies, yet can't walk outside. Her madness is now a self-fulfilling prophecy. Lock someone away for 20 years, and they'll act strange. Modern parallels? Think of anyone gaslit into doubting their own mind. As Part 3 wraps, Joanna's story is a bitter cocktail of resilience and ruin. She's 50-something, still queen, but her world's a shrinking cell. Charles's empire grows, her kids rule Europe, yet she's a shadow. Her Loca label a shackle. Part 4 will dive into her final years, decades more in Tordesillas, a death that barely makes a ripple, and a legacy twisted by history. Will you stay for the end? Comment your take. Is Joanna a tragic genius or a broken pawn? And what's the worst prison you can imagine, physical or mental? Let's keep this royal horror show alive. Welcome back, you die-hard history masochists, to the final act of our twisted tale about Joanna of Castile, the so-called Juana la Loca, whose life is a grim punchline to the myth of royal glory. If you've endured the coffin-dragging madness, the Comuneros' betrayal, and decades of Tordesillas confinement, you're either obsessed or just love watching history's cruelest soap opera. Picture this: a queen, once heir to Spain's golden age, now a frail shadow in a cell, her name propping up an empire while her son Charles V and grandson Philip II reap the rewards. The irony is sharper than a Spanish blade. Joanna's crown was her cage, her madness a convenient lie for men who stole her power. This is Part 4, where we wrap this nightmare with a sarcastic bow and marvel at the absurdity of surviving in a world that chews up queens and spits out legends. Let's dive in for the last time. We left Joanna in the 1530s, in her 50s, a ghost queen in Tordesillas. The revolt of the Comuneros in 1520-21 was her last glimpse of freedom, but her refusal to lead the rebels cemented her fate. A tighter prison, harsher keepers, and a legacy twisted into Juana la Loca. Her son Charles, now Holy Roman Emperor, rules a sprawling empire, Spain, the Netherlands, the Americas, bits of Italy, while Joanna's name stamps his decrees like a rubber seal. She's the linchpin of his legitimacy, yet locked away like a dirty secret. The pain of survival. Knowing your blood fuels a dynasty, but you're less free than the peasants tilling Castile's fields. The sarcasm? Oh, it's thick. A queen who birthed emperors, reduced to arguing with priests over candlelight. Let's set the final scene. Tordesillas, 1540s to 50s. Joanna's pushing 60, then 70, her body crumbling under decades of confinement. The palace is a damp, stone-walled prison. Think less Cinderella's castle, more medieval asylum. Her red hair's gone gray, her frame skeletal from poor food and no exercise. Her jailers, led by the Marquis of Denia's son, Luis, are relentless. They control her every move. Meals of bread and thin soup, ragged clothes, no visitors unless Charles approves. Reports from the time, like those from Denia's letters to Charles, describe Joanna as erratic, refusing baths, sleeping on straw, muttering to herself. Madness? Or the logical outcome of 40 years in a cage? Lock anyone away that long, and they'd be talking to the walls too. The absurdity, her jailers call it care, while modern psychologists scream abuse. Joanna's not entirely alone, but her company's no comfort. Priests visit to enforce Catholic piety, but she turns their sermons into debates, citing scripture with a scholar's precision. Her mother, Isabella, burned heretics for less, yet Joanna's branded heretical for her sharp tongue. Servants, loyal to Charles, report every word, twisting defiance into delirium. Her kids, distant stars in Europe's royal firmament. Charles visits in 1539, maybe 1543, each time a fleeting show of devotion. Her daughters, Eleanor, Isabella, Mary, Catherine, are queens or consorts, but they don't come. Ferdinand, her son, governs Austria, too busy for mom. Her grandchildren, like Philip II, who'll inherit Spain, are strangers. The pain. You're the root of a dynasty, but your branches don't reach back. The world outside Tordesillas is a whirlwind. Charles V battles Protestants, Turks, and French kings. His empire stretched thin. The New World's gold and silver flood Spain, fueling wars and inflation. Cortez conquers the Aztecs. Pizarro topples the Inca, all under Joanna's nominal reign. Her title, Queen of Castile and Aragon, adorns every edict, yet she's a prisoner. The irony stings. Spain's golden age shines brightest while its queen rots in shadow. Charles abdicates in 1556, splitting his empire. Ferdinand gets Austria, Philip II gets Spain and the Netherlands. Joanna's still alive, still queen, but no one asks her opinion. Survival means fading into irrelevance while your name's carved on history's throne. Let's dive deeper into the madness myth, the rotten heart of this tragedy. Was Joanna Loca? Parts 1 through 3 traced her story. Grief over Philip's death in 1506, twisted into insanity by her father Ferdinand. Her lucid refusal to lead the Comuneros in 1520, ignored by chroniclers like Pedro Mexia. Her sharp debates with priests, spun as heresy. By the 1540s, her symptoms, fasting, refusing hygiene, talking to herself, are textbook trauma responses. Historians like Bethany Aram argue depression or bipolar disorder, worsened by isolation. Others, like Glyn Redworth, say her madness was a fiction, crafted by Ferdinand and Charles to justify her imprisonment. A sane queen could demand power, a mad one's a prop. The sarcasm bites. Label a woman crazy, and you can steal her crown without drawing a sword. Her treatment in Tordesillas is a horror show. Denia's regime, approved by Charles, includes forced feedings, restraints, even whippings, all under the guise of curing her. Juan Luis Vives, the era's go-to scholar, endorsed harsh measures for melancholia, but this was cruelty, not medicine. Joanna's defiance, refusing food, rejecting Catholic rituals, reads like resistance. She'd argue theology, demanding proof of papal authority, a boldness her mother would have torched her for. The pain, surviving means enduring torture disguised as care, your spirit crushed to keep a dynasty's gears turning. Modern parallels? Think of gaslighting victims, their reality warped by those in power. Engage with me. Was Joanna's defiance a spark of genius or a cry of despair? Comment if you think she was fighting back or just broken by the end. And if you were trapped in Tordesillas for 40 years, how'd you hold on? Smuggle a book? Bribe a guard? Share your escape plan? I'm rooting for a secret tunnel. The absurdity peaks in Joanna's final years. By 1550, she's 71, a rarity in an era where most didn't hit 40. Her health's a wreck. Ulcers, malnutrition, maybe arthritis from decades in a damp cell. Yet she still argues with her keepers, demanding news of her empire. Charles, now nearing his own end, retires to a monastery in 1556, leaving Philip II to rule. Joanna's still queen, but Philip doesn't visit. Why would he? Grandma's a myth, her madness a family heirloom. When she falls ill in early 1555, with fever and sores, her jailers call it divine punishment. The irony, a queen who birthed empires, dying in obscurity while her grandson plots global conquest. Joanna dies on April 12th, 1555, at 75, in Tordesillas. Good Friday, fittingly. Her life was a crucifixion of sorts. Her death barely ripples. Philip's too busy with wars and weddings. She's buried in Granada's royal chapel, beside her parents and Philip the Handsome, her coffin journey finally complete. No grand funeral, no mourners beyond a few nuns. The pain? You're the mother of dynasties, but your grave's a footnote. The sarcasm? What a legacy. Locked away for 46 years, your name a prop for men who forgot you. Let's tie it all together. Part 1 gave us young Joanna, thrust into queenship by dead siblings, betrayed by her husband and father. Part 2 showed her early imprisonment and the Comuneros' failed rebellion. Part 3 traced her middle years, her lucidity buried under propaganda. Now, her final decades reveal the cost. A life erased. Her madness, a lie to keep power male. Her story's a mirror to the era's cruelty. Women like Catherine of Aragon or Mary Tudor faced similar traps. The absurdity. Spain's golden age, built on conquest and faith, rested on silencing its queen. Joanna's legacy is a bitter joke. Her son Charles V, her grandson Philip II, her descendants. They rule Europe for centuries, yet she's remembered as La Loca. Historians like Manuel Fernandez Alvarez argue she was more victim than villain, her grief and defiance twisted by a patriarchal world. Her kids' marriages, Eleanor to France, Ferdinand to Bohemia, cemented the Habsburgs, but Joanna got no credit. The pain. You birth an empire, but history writes you as a madwoman. One last engagement. Who's the real villain here? Ferdinand, Charles, or the system that caged her? Comment your pick and tell me. Could you survive 46 years in Tordesillas, or would you crack? Share your worst betrayal story, royal or not, and let's see if it tops Joanna's. As we close, imagine Joanna in your world. She'd marvel at your freedom, your voice, your ability to walk away from a bad situation. She'd laugh at our obsession with therapy, then cry for the lack of it in her time. Her life was a paradox, a queen who ruled nothing, a mother whose children locked her away, a woman whose strength was called insanity. The Romans bathed in filth and called it clean. Joanna ruled an empire and called it prison. Her story's a lesson in hubris, betrayal, and survival against all odds. So, what's the verdict? Is Joanna a tragic hero, a misunderstood genius, or just a pawn in history's cruel game? Comment your final take. Rank her mad moments from heartbreaking to absurd. And if you loved this dive into Spain's darkest royal tale, share your favorite fact. Let's keep the conversation as fierce as Joanna's spirit. Until next time, stay free. And thank your stars you're not a queen in 1555.